the CentreSteer podcast, a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners.
Welcome to the CentreSteer podcast number 137 for August of 2024. CentreSteer is a monthly podcast for Land Rover enthusiasts, hobbyists, and owners around the world. Bob Steele is our guest this month. Bob has a unique story for how he joined the Land Rover community. He's owned nearly every model there is the driving force behind ANARC and the Diamond Jubilee celebration last year. And, as you probably know, is a regular supporter of the podcast. So stay tuned to hear how Bob's nearly 3 decades involvement started with Land Rover.
Bonus fact, his name is the same forward and backward.
I'm John Costage, and joining me are fellow Land Rover owners and enthusiasts. We only have one this month, and that's Harold. Welcome, Harold.
Hey, hopefully I'll be enough.
Oh, I'm sure. Absolutely. Morgan is not able to join us so far this month. Dixon has another excused absence. He's attending OVLR's birthday party this weekend that we're recording.
Which will make it the only excused absence where his feet are upon the planet at the time of the absence.
Thanks to our Patreon and Buy Me a Tea subscribers for their support. Patreon supporters receive bonus content, including 10 questions, our Land Rover-oriented question and answer lightning round. And we welcome our latest Patreon member, Thomas. Thanks for your support, Thomas. I also owe you a t-shirt, Thomas, and I will get that in the mail. Now it's time for the North American Club Calendar. But before we talk about what's coming up on the club calendar, why don't we talk about what happened on the club calendar? Harold got to attend the North Star Rover Rally up in Gilbert, Minnesota. Harold, give us a review of the North Star Rally.
Yeah, it was a great event. It was an ANARC event this year, but it's a continuation of the event that they've been doing for, I think, 40 years now. I think this was the 41st annual picnic, they call it. It started out very inauspicious with basically just a little leaflet being mimeographed and sent out to a mailing list of people that expressed an interest. But it's turned into a really nice event. And this year, with it going full ANARC, it was probably, I'm going to say, twice as many people there. It was a nice turnout, and we had that campground to ourselves pretty much, which really made the event nice because we had a centric place to be. And this campground is not one we've used before. So it was very nicely laid out. It was very open, very square, so you could find people quickly. That was really very nice. I got there actually before the check-in started. I got there a little ahead of time, so I was able to bring a stack of CentreSteer stickers and get them into the swag bags for everybody. Hope our listeners who were there enjoyed that. If you didn't know who we were, maybe you do now.
And hopefully you're listening now. Welcome.
And hopefully you're listening. Yes. Welcome to the show. And it was nice to see some people who have been on our show before were up there. And I punked Scott Preston over the weekend. Sorry, Scott, but it was too much fun. We were sitting around, I believe it was the first night, doing the campfire thing. And Scott is talking and he's telling some stories, and so I joined the conversation and added a few details that were basically things that he had said in his interview on our show, so anybody who listens to our show would know these things. I would mention these things, and Scott got this look in his eye like, how the hell do you know that? But he didn't say anything, and I didn't ever bother to go up and say, hey, Scott, it's nice to see you in person. I'm Harold, in case you don't, because I figured people know who I am. I just don't even think to do these kinds of things. So for the rest of the weekend, it's like I'm interacting with him because I'm helping with the RTV course, which is what he was there to do with Jeff and Alex from Rowers North. And so I'm interacting with Scott, and he keeps getting this weird look in his eye. Who is this guy? How does he know so much about me? But I feel like I should know him, but I don't know who it is. Saturday night, we're rolling into the banquet, and he's riding with Jeff, and he's like, who is that guy? And that's Harold from the CentreSteer podcast. And Scott's, God damn it. He was a good sport about it, but sorry, Scott, I punked you a little bit.
That's all in good fun.
It was fun.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun, but yeah, Scott and I had a good time. We ate dinner together that night, so he didn't have any hard feelings about it. kind of had an impromptu media table at the dinner because I sat with Jeff Aronson and the ladies, the Rebel ladies, who are part of a certain other Land Rover centric podcast.
Yes, the Underpower Hour.
That was great fun. They put on a good show.
I heard good things about their presentation.
Yeah, they had a presentation. There's this really nice education center that's part of the off-road park. It's like set up like a classroom. And so there was like a big screen they could put things up on, and they were tables and desks and chairs in there. It was packed. Every chair was filled, and there were people standing all there to see their presentation, and they were talking about the past Rebel that they've been in and what they're looking forward to with the next Rebel, which was really cool because a lot of people still don't get what the Rebel is about. So it was nice to have them share that.
There were people standing outside the venue trying to listen in. It was more than standing room only.
Yeah, the room was full. I was standing in the foyer to the building outside, kind of looking through, and yeah, it was full. So that was nice. They were also there to run the physical challenge portion of the ANARC Cup competition. And they messed with everybody. It was a mental and a physical challenge. And the competitors in this had a tire. They had a spare tire. And the premise is you need to take the spare tire to your colleague in the woods somewhere, and you have just a compass heading to get there. Not telling people, of course, that there's a lot of uphill and downhill while you're carrying this tire. And they're given a compass heading, but they snuck a couple of extra words in there. They used the words back bearing, which, if you don't know what that means, is if it says, let's say, 170 degrees back bearing, that means if you're pointing your compass at 170 degrees, it's straight behind you. It's minus 180. Everyone ignored that. They just saw the number. They got out their compass. They did a heading, and they went 180 degrees in the wrong direction.
Wow. Nice.
With this 40-pound tire on their shoulder. And then at another point, I think the final leg of the challenge, they were given a compass heading that was in degrees and minutes and seconds, and they had to calculate and transpose that into decimal degrees. And when they had to give this number at the final checkpoint, which I think was Liza there, and she would tell them they were correct, they pass, they'd get their score, or they're wrong, they can either sit there and recalculate, or they can carry their tire back up the hill to where Jenna is standing, and she will give them a hint as to how to do the math, and then they can come back down the hill again to turn in the result. So a lot of uphill, downhill, a lot of mental thinking and some math, and not just aiming the compass and going.
Did you participate in that?
I did not. It was only the people competing in the ANARC Cup.
Ah, gotcha. That was part of the ANARC Cup. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I was marshaling the RTV course. It was fun. A lot of people up there had never seen an RTV course before because I don't think they've had one in the Midwest before. So it was very interesting. And most people there didn't know what to expect unless they were people visiting from Virginia or whatever. And Jeff, he has had his team there the day in advance. They scoped everything out. They picked some good spots to make a challenge. And they actually, the ground there is so hard because of all the rocks and the iron ore that they had to go out and buy a hammer drill to put the poles in the ground. And they'd set all these poles. And then Jeff, being devious, such as he is, went around and dug some extra holes right next to the poles so that it grabs your tire and sucks you in and makes you hit the pole.
Nice.
So yeah, that's Jeff.
I think he did that at the Pacific Rally too.
Yeah, I suspect that's one of his tools in his arsenal.
So there you go. Be prepared for the GARR. This will probably happen again.
Yeah, and it's probably, with all this sandy, loose soil, it's going to be an interesting challenge. He found a place in the park at Gilbert where it was very loose and dusty like that. And it was also sort of bowl shaped. So gravity kept pulling you into the poles, plus the extra holes he dug. I was in the final stage, a much more rocky location. But it was very nice until it started pouring down rain in the middle of it.
Oh,
So we had to pull everybody back in because there was a big lightning risk. And so they pulled everybody back in for an hour and people did lunch and whatever. And then they felt like it was clear. So they sent everybody back out and we finished the activity. I've not really been involved with an RTV course before. So it was nice.
did you run the RTV?
I did not.
Were
I
there
did not.
people running the RTV as the first time, like off-roading? Because we had that at the Pacific Rally. People that didn't typically off-road or didn't want to go off-road, but the RTV was a nice controlled environment, so to speak. I wonder if you had that.
I don't know per se if there were any first-time off-roaders out there, unless you count the little kids. So there were little kids learning to drive, and they were doing the RTV as a way to get their experience up. But there were a lot of people who were doing an RTV course for the first time.
That's good. That's good. Did you off-road on any of the trails?
I did a little bit. I ended up on Friday, which was the big open trail day, because Saturday was going to be the RTV course and the ANARC Cup Challenge and all the organized stuff. And then the big banquet was Saturday night as well. But Friday was sort of the open trail day. And I opted to take the road tour. One of our club members up there, a guy by the name of Dale, he grew up in that area. And so he organized a driving tour of some of the sites. And we drove over and we looked at the Hull Rust Mine, which is the world's largest open pit mine. And there's an overlook. And you go up there and they have a bunch of like vintage mining equipment, trucks with wheels as big as my house and things like that. They had this overlook and you look out over the pit. You literally cannot see the far side of the pit. It is that big.
So what's that? Several hundred feet?
No,
Not maybe
thousands.
Oh,
It's like multiple miles across.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah, it's huge and it's deep. And you really need binoculars just to see those monstrous trucks driving around in the bottom of the pit. It is that big. And then after that, we went down to tour the Hibbing High School, which sounds like, okay, it's just a high school tour. But tell you what, this high school was built 100 years ago with mining money because the mine decided they wanted all the iron ore that was underneath the town of Hibbing. So they moved the entire town. and as a bonus, they kicked in some funds to build, basically, as they build it, the finest high school in the country. And this thing is amazing. It's been maintained. It looks like it's just opened. And it's 100 years old.
Wow.
They graduated 120 students that first year. Spent $4 million in 1920 to graduate for a class of 120 kids.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. They graduated 175 last year. So the school is still in operation. It's still viable. It's like marble and these hand embossed plaster with the hand painting and stuff. It's got a theater in it that can seat the entire town of Hibbing with a pipe organ and a full theatrical stage and an orchestra pit big enough for the full university band. It's just amazing the amount of details they put into this small town high school. That was a really neat tour. And we did lunch at a place that I guess used to be a gas station. Some guy named Porky and his daughter Fuddy owned it, built it, and anyway, you get all these details from Dale. And then there were other things to do on the way back, some other things to look at, which I elected not to do. I just drove back. But that was Friday's road tour, which was really cool. And then Friday night, the special trail event Friday night was a night water crossing. It was organized by our friend, internet sensation, Dr. Rick. And he drove these people for an hour to find this place. And then they're driving through the woods and getting their trucks all scratched up because there was lots of branches and they're doing this water crossing. Meanwhile, those of us who didn't go on that stayed at the campsite and were entertained by Astro Bob, which we'd heard Astro Bob was coming, but we thought that was going to be just like Bob Steele in costume or something, smoking some weed and saying, oh, look at that one up there. But no, Astro Bob's a real guy. He's a well-known astronomer in that area, and he comes out and he does these mobile shows, and he comes out in this little compact car with this huge telescope stuffed into the back of it. And he got out this telescope, and he had this other little telescope. It was really more like a camera and a telescope with some sort of weird motor drive on it. So you can punch in coordinates in the sky and it will aim this camera and it will sit there and take image after image and it will build a really cool picture because it's doing all of these multiple images. So that was cool. But he brought this telescope and was having us look at we saw some planets. We saw Jupiter, or we didn't see Jupiter. We saw Saturn. I can't remember now. We saw Saturn and then one of the others. And we saw a lot of stars, got to see some nebulae. And we saw this really cool, what they call the ring nebula. It was a star that had gone white dwarf. So it had snuffed out, but the radiation still lit up the ring of gas around the star. So it was just this ring in the sky. And he was pointing all these things out to us with this laser pointer that is unbelievable. He just whips out this little laser pointer and he hits the button and says, okay, now look at that star up there. And there's this beam of green light going billions of miles into the sky and banging off that star up there.
I hear it's like a lightsaber.
Yeah, I think it would make Obi-Wan jealous because it did everything but go.
You probably make your own noises.
Yeah, you could. Don't want to be in that field in a few more years when it comes bouncing back off of something. Yeah, it's a good thing there weren't any aircraft overhead because he would have sliced a wing off with that thing.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Wow.
It's just like pointing stuff out in the sky. You just got to buckle up and go along for the ride because he's just whipping through it.
That's cool. That's very cool.
It was a very cool show. It's not something you experience at most rover events. And he stayed extra long because the people who came back from the water crossing and they thought they'd missed it, they came hustling up and he did a whole nother show for them. So he was there till well after midnight.
Very entertaining.
Yeah.
That's good.
And one of the park rangers from the off-road park heard he was coming. So she came over after the park closed and got to sit on that, which was really neat.
What happens on Saturday?
So Saturday was the RTV course and, of course, trail riding for anybody who wanted to go on the trail ride, but it was a little less organized. But then it was the RTV course and the ANARC Cup Challenge, and then the big dinner, the banquet Saturday night with the speeches. And the luminaries there this year were some of the original founders of the club from 40 plus years ago, which was really pretty neat. And then, of course, Jeff did his thing and did the auction and a lot of funds were raised. A lot of stuff was auctioned off, like all those banners that Rovers North so generously had made up for us. Those all got auctioned off. Like the big winner was the really long banner that had last year's group photo in it. That says "Welcome to the North Star Rover Rally." I think those went for $200 plus a piece.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that all helps the Minnesota Land Rover Club going forward.
Right. Yeah. Rovers North really does a lot of support for the different events that are going on, especially through ANARC.
Yeah. And not to mention all of the RTV course signage and stuff that were left with the club. So if the club wants to do their own RTV in the future, they can.
It helps to spread the RTV throughout North America by leaving those behind so that you can then have your own. You can, at the next picnic, they could do it again if they wish.
And enough people helped Scott and Jeff and Alex to set it up so they saw how it was done, and enough local people like myself volunteered to marshal it. So there's enough people that know how to run the RTV course now that we could do it again.
Do you have a sense of how many trucks were there, how many people, and what would you say was the breakdown of the different types of models of trucks that showed up?
In Minnesota, I'd say they're heavy on LR3s and LR4s because they haven't had time to rust out yet. There are some D1s and D2s, but they seem to be thinning out just because now you really have to put forth the effort to restore them and keep them nice.
Right.
Dr. Rick was there with a D1, a Range Rover Classic, his 322 supercharged, and his Bond edition, which of course did not see any trail.
For those who don't know, that's the Bond edition New Defender.
Yes. Of which one of the trivia questions in the scavenger hunt was, how many of those were sold in North America? The correct answer is 69. And the bonus question is, how many are there in the upper Midwest? The correct answer is 1.
And that is Dr. Rick's.
That is Dr. Rick's, yes. It's a matte black new 110. Other than that, I don't see what's Bond about it, but
I
yeah,
think they
sure.
put some 007 badging in certain places, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and his vanity license plate had something like that as well, but nonetheless.
How many people in attendance? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't remember exactly how many trucks were in the picture from last year. I'm going to say it was probably 30-ish, and I'm guessing that we're probably twice that.
Yeah. I think there were like 75 trucks were registered. Of course, I didn't attend because I was on vacation elsewhere, but I think there was
So that's
trucks.
probably better than my just guessing off my head. So yeah, that's a good number.
Yeah.
That seems about right.
Gotcha. There were series trucks in attendance?
There were series trucks there, yeah. Tony brought his up and loaned it to the Rovers North crew as their official RTV course marshals.
What about any unique Rovers there? Aside from maybe the Bond Edition Defender?
There were a few high caps there.
I guess yours was unique, right? You took your 130?
Yeah. My 130 was there, which is, a little outside the ordinary. There were Lucky 8 brought some of their new stuff. There were Trek Defenders there, and there was a dealer group that was also Trek participants. They brought their stuff. There was actually a kitted out 130 there, which is the new 130, which is unique.
Was it any chance, do you know if it was the Outbound Edition?
I didn't get a good look at it.
And speaking of newer Defenders, were there a lot of those? It seems like that's a growing segment of the community is new Defenders.
Yeah, I think there were. I think there were more real Defenders, if you will, proper Defenders than new ones. But yeah, there were new Defenders there. Like I said, it's pretty heavy into the LR3s and 4s there.
Okay.
I'd say that maybe not a majority, but a plurality of the trucks there were 3s and 4s.
Right. Any other highlights for you or interesting, unique stories?
It seems so long ago, and yet it was just a couple weeks.
I know. Believe me, I understand.
It's such a neat event. And if you didn't get a chance to go this year, I strongly recommend that you find a way to get there next year, because just the venue itself is so different from what you're used to. And there's a lot of elevation changes within the park, and that is entirely caused by tailings from the mining operation being shoved into a pile. That is all the junk left over from harvesting all the metal that we've been using for a long time. They say that 70% of the metal used in World War II came out of northern Minnesota.
Wow.
That's a nifty little statistic for you. But that also means that 70% of the metal that we've used in this country for longer than that is probably all came out of northern Minnesota. So it's orange gold. And that's just, that area is so rich with it. But they just, the nature of open pit mining is you scrape all the junk off to get to what you need. And then you can put it back when you're done, or you just keep building it up in big piles. And so there's these huge scenic overlooks where you can look out for miles and miles. And it's by virtue of your being on top of a mound of trash. But what makes the park in Gilbert so unique is that was an older mine that was closed down, I think, in the 50s. And so they didn't have the same technology they have now. So the tailings, which is the junk that's left over, they didn't pulverize them into fine gravels to get all of the iron out. So there's a lot of big boulders in this park. And so there's a lot of, like you see out west with the big boulders and rock challenges. You'll just be cruising through the park and suddenly there's some of that. But yet there's like access roads that go all through the park that you can drive in an ordinary car. So there's just a little bit of everything. But and the bright involved in it are just very interesting to look at. So it's a very unique place. The fact that it's run by the state and accessible to anyone and in that way protected, so you don't have to worry about it not being there, is really cool. And like I said, you really need to go experience it. And the Minnesota Land Rover Club, they're good people, so they're good people to hang out with. So I strongly recommend, if you haven't been to their event, you should go.
Is the picnic always in the same place and at the same time?
I'm going to say almost always, because it typically is I'm going to say second weekend in August, but it got moved up this year to accommodate the ANARC thing. So it was a little bit earlier this year than it typically is. But they don't always go to Gilbert. There's some other places they have gone in the past, but I think Gilbert is most of the time that's where it is, just because it is such a great place and there's so many different things for different people there. But Minnesota has a lot of trails all over the state. They're really well set up. They put out this magazine, they call it an atlas, and it's like 100 pages of off-road trails.
Excellent.
So there's a lot of things to do, but yeah, Gilbert is really just a gem.
Well, Harold, thanks very much for giving us the review of the North Star Rover Rally.
My pleasure.
And now for the North American events calendar with Dixon. Although Dixon's out, that leaves it with Harold and I to discuss. Coming up on the calendar is the MAR, the Mid-Atlantic Rally, taking place September 26th through September 29th. Although I believe it's sold out within, several hours back in early August.
Yeah, which seems to be the tradition. So if you have to hear about it here now, it might be too late.
And this is the 30th anniversary of the MAR event itself. Next year will be the 40th anniversary of Rove, the club that puts on MAR. And then following that is the GARR, the Gulf Area Rover Romp. We'll go into more detail on that in just a moment. And then coming up in November 10th is the Rover Rendezvous put on by the Southern California Rover Club. And that takes place at Stagecoach Trails over on the West Coast. That's the Rover Rendezvous 2024.
Not familiar with that venue. Where in the state is that? Do you know?
Julian, California.
That didn't help me, but okay. But for our friends out there, it probably does.
It is just outside of San Diego.
Way down there.
Yes. Actually, you can see Mexico, apparently, from there. We're very close anyways, almost.
Alrighty, then.
That's the upcoming events in the next few months. Let's talk more about the GARR, the Gulf Area Rover Romp, which is the third and final ANARC-supported event for 2024. This is going to take place in Robertsdale, Alabama, which is roughly halfway between Mobile and Pensacola, Florida, October 24th through Sunday, October 27th. Stepping in here, hopefully you don't notice a difference in audio quality. Since we recorded the news, the GARR details were finalized. Now joining us for the exclusive announcement is Charles Bell, president of the Gulf Coast Land Rover Club. Welcome, Charles.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, let's get to it. We've opened up registration for the Gulf Area Rover Romp.
Yes.
And registration's now open. You can register for the GARR and join us in Alabama. Charles, tell us, what can people expect?
Yeah, we're really excited about this. This will be, to my knowledge, the first rally of this size in the area. We are going to have a really good turnout. We have a lot of things in store. We're going to have off-roading at a local park, which is called Grand River Motorsports Park, and really great trails, some mud, obstacles. That is also where we're going to have the RTV challenges and competition that ANARC does. And our base of operations will be at the retreat at Styx River, which is an RV park. And they have fantastic accommodations. With the registration, you get a primitive campsite. But if you would prefer to have something a little nicer, or maybe you want to do a little glamping by the river, when you sign up, you can get information on how to contact the retreat and set up additional accommodations on if you want to do more than just a tent in the woods.
Yeah, that's what I've done. I've gotten one of the glamping tents. That's right by the river, I'm told.
It's right by Styx River. They're really nice. I think you're going to like that.
Yeah, I think so. Looks like based on the website and the information we have, there's a hideaway cabin, there's weekender cabins. There are tent sites that have electric and water to them. Something called boondocking. I'm not sure what that is. Apparently Bob Steele does.
Boondocking is just a campsite, but it's a bigger campsite to house if your RV has everything enclosed and you don't have to hook up anything. They just take up a little more space.
Gotcha. So it's like an RV site, but no hookup.
Correct. That's the knowledge that I have.
Okay. Then there's also RV sites, including the boondocking. There's full hookup, and then there's just water and electric. So that is all available at the Retreat Campground, RV and Campground, which is located in, is it Robertsdale? Or get that right? Yeah,
Robertsdale, Alabama. Yes.
The off-roading activities, the RTV courses, you said, the ANARC Cup Challenge and general off-roading is going to take place at the Grand River Motorsports. Can you tell us more about Grand River Motorsports? Where's it located? And how will we organize off-roading events?
The great thing about it is the motorsports park, Grand River, is located less than 10 minutes away from where our center of operation is going to be at the retreat. And it's a nice backcountry ride. Grand River offers a lot. There's a lot of trails. There are several sections with some obstacles that they've built and set up for just those who want to have a little more challenge. They have a lot of trails. There's some really deep mud in some sections that might interest some. I'm not so interested in the really deep mud, but we'll see what happens. We're going to have a lot of trails to offer. We're also going to utilize the trails in some other events like a scavenger hunt. We're going to do at least one evening ride, which will probably end after dark. So a night ride-ish. That time of year usually starts to get dark about 7:20, 7:30 Central Time. That would be really nice. There are a lot of short trails. There are some longer trail sections, and you can really just explore the park at your leisure or join some of the guided rides that will take you to some more of the unique, challenging spots, depending on what level you want to do.
There will be guided and self-guided trail riding then.
Correct.
Gotcha. What's the terrain like? What can people expect? I'm coming from the Pennsylvania. It's tough to decide whether that's Northeast or Midwest. We get a little weird about it. We have hills and trees and usually mud or softish kind of dirt. What to expect in that part of Alabama?
We have no hills whatsoever, unless it was brought in artificially. We have it's most of the terrain in the park is a sandy, silty dirt. If there's rain, it'll be a sandy, silty mud. We have a lot of trees, oak trees, pine trees. And if it rains, we can have some really interesting sections, but it's basically just flat and muddy or sandy or dry and dusty. That's our variance.
How close is it to where the Land Rover rally used to take place? And is that a similar terrain?
It's actually very similar terrain. The Land Rover rally had more sand because it was closer to the coast. It's still very similar. It's 2 to 2.5 hours away from where the Land Rover rally was taking place. We're a little more west of there.
Okay. And back to the retreat, that's where the center of the social type activities are going to take place. And that's the campground. Included with registration is primitive camping. What can folks expect for the primitive camping?
Primitive camping is going to be nice, and it's going to be first come, first serve as far as where you're going to locate your tent or your rooftop tent. However you have it set up. There are some primitive campsites right on Styx River. There are some that have a really nice view of the pavilion and kind of in the middle of the trees, like dispersed camping, because there's a lot of trees that you can set up around. Really nice manicured grounds and a lot of space to stretch out.
And if folks don't want to camp, or if the paid camping fills up, there are hotels within the general area. I believe there's
Correct.
2 hotels about 11 miles west of the retreat. You know how I know this because I did the research and put it on the website. There's also, thanks to you, there's some additional hotels that are 20 to 30 miles away, east and west, right along the I-10. And actually all these activities, Robertsdale is right along I-10 between Mobile, Alabama and Pensacola, Florida. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And so I-10 goes right between them, and we're going to be right up against both at camping and at the motorsport location are right up against I-10.
Yeah. Thankfully, it's 5 minutes off of I-10 to get to the retreat and another 5 or 10 minutes to get to Grand River. It's really convenient. If you are staying at one of the hotels, the Daphne Spanish Fort area, there's probably 6 or 7 hotels just in that area, a lot of places to eat. And it's 20, 25 minutes to get to the park from there. So it's really convenient and gives you a lot of flexibility.
An important thing to note about the paid accommodation at the retreat is the sites are on a first come, first served basis, and they
Yes.
are going to open up back to the general public starting on September 20th. If you want a paid spot, you need to register as soon as possible to get the information on how to contact the retreat so that you can then go ahead and reserve. If you go through the website for the retreat, it's going to take you to Airbnb, and that is all blocked off right now because it's blocked off for us.
Correct.
So you'll get information on how to contact the retreat with your registration. I'll be in the email registration, and then you can contact the retreat and get your paid site. If you are just going to do regular primitive camping on your own, there is a checkbox in registration. We do ask on the registration where you're going to stay and how, whether that's on site or maybe you're going to stay at an offsite hotel. But if you're going to be doing primitive camping, there's nothing else you need to do. You get that complimentary with your GARR registration.
Correct. And the September 20th is also an important date because until September 20th, we have an early bird special on registration, which gives you a little bit of a discount. And that coincides with the time that the retreat will open up the glamping areas and the other accommodation areas to the general public. Whereas it doesn't matter when you register. If you're doing primitive camping, you will have a space. There's a ton of space for primitive camping. That won't be an issue.
Registration is $175 for a driver and your Land Rover through September 20th. It then goes up to $200 on September 21st. And passengers are $60 for early registration and then goes up to $75. Children 15 and under, $25, no matter when you register. And if you're bringing an additional Land Rover, that's $100. May seem a little pricey for the activities, but that does include a weekend pass to the Grand River Motorsports Complex. You're able to utilize that for 4 days.
4 days.
Thursday through Sunday. While we are going to have some guided trail rides, you can certainly go out on your own. If you want to stay through Sunday and explore after GARR is officially over, you're certainly welcome to do that. But that's included in your Rover and driver registration.
Correct. Thankfully, my son is still 15, so I'm getting the discount there as well.
Just a cutoff. Well done, sir. Well done. You got the right cutoff. There we go. And in your traditional North American or Land Rover rally activities, there's going to be a Saturday night dinner taking place at the retreat. I believe it's called the Hideout, which is a pavilion there at the retreat.
Correct. We have access to 2 pavilions there. One pavilion will be for registration, get your goodie bag when you come in, and some of those administrative type activities. And then we have the hangout, I think is what it is. And that's where we're going to have our Saturday night dinner. I think we're going to try to do a Friday evening get together just to let people mingle around a central place. But we'll have access to those 2 buildings all weekend long.
And what about campfires? I know a lot of folks like to have campfires when they're at the Rover Rally.
There are several designated areas for campfires around a lot of the boondocking sites. There are fire rings that are available. There are at least 2 sections that have a rock ring for larger bonfires. I'm actually in talks with management at the retreat about how we're going to do campfires, maybe more centralized to a few campsites.
Yeah, that's a good socialization activity, having a central campfire of some sort or bonfire.
Absolutely.
And as far as additional meals, there is a diner that's 2 miles from the retreat called the Derailed Diner.
Yes, and it's tasty.
Oh, you've been there.
They have some good food there.
And then there are some additional restaurants that are about roughly 15 miles southwest of the retreat for lunches or breakfast. You're on your own for those. If you're not going to be making something at the campground, there are options for you within. That's not too bad. I'd say 15 miles isn't too bad.
A lot of it's still pretty convenient. Well, Saturday night is the big dinner, which is included in your registration. And let me just note that it's Ed's Seafood that will be providing our catered dinner, and Ed's Seafood has some really tasty choices for us. After dinner, we're going to have probably some type of auction. We're going to do some giveaways. We're going to have the awards for the RTV competition. It's going to be a good time.
I do know for the auction, I know one thing that will be in the auction. Someone is supplying a commemorative can of beer. There will be.
Ooh,
Yes.
that should go well.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. What other activities are taking place? Because I know there are some expo sessions that are planned. Can you give us any details on who will be providing the expo sessions?
We know that we're going to have some expo sessions while we're there. We're still working on finalizing who's going to be doing those expo sessions, but they're going to be, I know some of the options that we have, and they're going to be fantastic. That would definitely be something not to miss.
And that's going to be Saturday morning, I believe.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit more about the RTV course / competition. No, I don't think many in North America are familiar with that. It comes from the UK and it stands for Road Taxed Vehicle Course, or that's what the RTV part is. And Rovers North is sponsoring it, and they have been sponsoring all of the ANARC supported events throughout this year. And we are following our ANARC Cup rules and scoring. And on the event page for the GARR, there's a link to that information. So you might want to check that out. But the nice thing about the RTV, and you've probably heard me say this on the podcast before, is that it's a controlled course. You certainly can always cause a major problem for yourself or your vehicle, but it's controlled in the sense that you're most likely not going to hurt yourself or others. And you can challenge yourself especially if you've never gone off road. It's a good opportunity to go up and down a hill and see what that's like. Be a little bit of off camber, which means your vehicle might lift a wheel, or you might be at 10 degrees onto the side and you're not familiar with that. This is a good opportunity to test that out and see how your vehicle responds, see how you respond to those events as you're driving. And you can go at your own pace. You can go slow. You're definitely not going to go fast. It is a Land Rover after all. Except for the modern ones, right? With the turbochargers.
The modern ones are faster.
Yes, they are.
The great thing about the RTV course is it's very technical, which gives you a chance to hone your skills on technical driving, which is very different than just running up and down the trails. You have to be very specific and precise in how you operate your vehicle. There are usually flags and cones in strategic places to make you, like you say, you're not going too fast. If you hit a cone or a flag, it's usually points docked off and
points added, sir. Sorry to stop you there. It's actually points added. The lower the score, the better. So,
that's right. It's like golf.
Yes, exactly. And that's what always gets me. I've helped with the RTV. I always think it's the opposite, but it's actually the lower the score, the better. If you tap a cane with your rear bumper or with your...
Or have to back up depending on what course you're on.
Exactly. If you have to make an adjustment and you back up, you're supposed to yell shunt. But you get one shunt per course. Otherwise, you get points added to you. The higher the score, the worse it is.
If you're in a Series 3 127, you're going to be having to shunt a lot.
Or maybe a Series 3 109. You know, what folks probably don't know is it has manual steering.
And no turning radius whatsoever.
It has a turning radius, sir. Just measure it in miles. The RTV course will be open throughout the event, but the trials part of it, the actual competition, will take place on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And you can go out to the event site and see the lineup. Of course, that's always subject to change, but right now that is the plan. And another thing I wanted to draw everyone's attention to is on Friday in the morning, we're currently planning on a scenic tour of Mobile, Alabama.
Yeah, I'm putting together a route that will really showcase the city of Mobile. Mobile is a 300-plus-year-old city. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of history, and it really has a unique architecture. There's French, Spanish, colonial influences in the city, in the architecture. You can still see that in sections of downtown. There are places to get coffee. There's a lot of good places for food and just sightseeing and some of the historic homes. It's really a neat city. It's not a big city. We're not even talking the size of New Orleans, which most of our listeners may not be familiar with that as well. We're definitely not talking Pittsburgh or some of the big Northeast cities. It's really quaint and it has a lot to offer. Being located on Mobile Bay, the views coming into Mobile are really nice. It would be a fun excursion.
Unfortunately, I think my travel plans get me in there after the scenic tour, but that's okay. That's okay. Mobile where that Callahan's, is it Callahan's bar is?
Yes.
Yes, I've been there. Yes, I have been there. That's the one that has the Series 3 cut in half.
No. There's a Callahan's in Mobile, but it's not a Kerrigan's is what you're thinking.
Kerrigan's, right.
Kerrigan's is in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
If you're coming from up north, you might be passing through Birmingham. That would be a good place to stop.
Yes.
They do have the Series 3 cut in half as the back of their bar.
Yes.
So there's a Callahan's pub that has probably the best burger in town.
Okay.
The Callahan's burger is amazing. And that pub's been around for quite a while.
Is that the pub you and I went to when I came down for the Land Rover rally?
No, we went to the Ice House. Actually, no, it was Hate Blue at the time. It was Hate Blue. Because he had a Series Land Rover as their company vehicle for a while. Unfortunately, they're no longer around. But yeah, that was cool.
The scenic tour sounds really cool. There's a lot of activities, as you can see on the event site, that are planned for the GARR, the Gulf Area Rover Romp. Charles, how can folks find out more information? I don't think we've ever mentioned this. When exactly is the GARR taking place?
The GARR is taking place October 24th or 27th. You do have to be a member of ANARC or a member of ANARC member club, which the Gulf Coast Land Rover Club happens to be a member of the ANARC club. And our membership is really difficult. You just have to go onto our Facebook page and join. I know it's tough, but
you have to say yes,
I think it
please.
can be done.
Yeah, that's very similar to the Fort Pitt Club. You just say, hey, I think I'm a member now. And you're like, yep, sure.
Exactly. You do have to get approved. The approval process is pretty easy for us. All joking aside, be a member. That's the easy part.
And the main reason for that, for why I know some folks question it, the main reason for that is really has to do with the insurance and how
Correct.
the insurance comes down. I don't know all the details. I just know it has to do with insurance. And if you have a problem with that, sorry, that's just the way it is. And we're dealing with the situation as is handed to us.
And so when you are a member of a member club or just a member of ANARC, you are covered for the event under whatever insurance umbrella that we have for that said event.
Exactly.
So you can go to anarc.club/GARR-romp.
It's even easier. Just go to anarc.club and right from the homepage, there is a link to the Gulf Area Rover Romp. We have the nice new logo for the event, and it'll take you right to the event page.
So go to the ANARC club page, click on the icon for the Gulf Area Rover Romp, the GARR, and that'll take you to the registration page, and then scroll down and go to register now. And that will take you to the page where you fill out all of your information, pick the type of registration you want to do, whether you are by yourself, have multiple vehicles, multiple people.
Yeah, that'll take you to the Zephy site. We use Zephy. It's a non-profit focused registration site. They charge no fees, which is very nice. ANARC is going to make a small donation to them to help support their operations. As a result, then all the fees that we're charging come to ANARC, and also are going to help support the GARR for this particular event. And yes, as Charles said, you get to select what you want for registering. Once you select something, it'll take you to a page. I guess we're going to walk you through this just a little bit. It'll ask you for your name and information, what club you're with, what model Land Rover you're bringing, license plate, state or province that you're coming from, what t-shirt size you like, what your anticipated accommodations are going to be. Are you going to participate in any guided trails? What level of difficulty you prefer if you do go trail riding. And we also ask for an emergency contact and telephone number. We hope nothing goes wrong, but just in case, we want to make sure we can contact somebody back home for you if you're not able to do that. And then you can pay once you click on confirm, and then you will get an email, and it will have the confirmation that you're registered for the event. And also, if you wish to have paid accommodations at the retreat, there'll be a telephone number there to reach Nancy, and you can then schedule your paid accommodations with her.
Yes, it's really quite simple. It was easy to do. And thankfully, they even have a donation spot. You're talking about Zephy being for free. There's a donation spot where you check out. If you can, I would encourage you to donate, because this does help ANARC and the local clubs as well save you money when we do these types of events.
Charles, thanks very much for coming on to the podcast. Now that we have all the details of the GARR sorted out, most of them anyways, there's still a couple little things to tie up. But thanks very much for giving everybody the preview of the GARR.
Thank you, John. And go to the site, get registered as soon as you can. Don't forget the September 20th deadline for the discounted rate. And I look forward to seeing y'all there.
Now let's move on to the news for August. First up, JLR delivers best Q1 revenue on record. This is from Land Rover itself. Revenue was £7.3 billion, up 5% year on year. JLR's highest Q1 revenue on record. Profit before tax and exceptional items was £693 million, which is up 59% year on year. And their cash flow was £230 million. There is a quote here to read from Adrian Mardell, who's the CEO. Thanks to the hard work and commitment of our people, JLR has delivered an outstanding set of results in the first quarter with record revenues and an increase in year-on-year quarterly profits of nearly 60%. A little further detail here. Revenue for the quarter was £7.3 billion, the best Q1 record on record, up 5%. Compared to Q4 fiscal year 24, revenue was down 7%, reflecting fewer production weeks in Q1 of fiscal year 25 versus quarter 4 of fiscal year 24. Now, Land Rover's on that weird fiscal quarter where they're already in fiscal year 25 now.
That's not that uncommon. A lot of corporations do that.
It's still confusing to deal with when you're in the calendar year versus the fiscal year.
Yeah, I think it's actually maybe nonprofits do that more than regular corporations.
Next, Motor Trend has this article on what's going on with Land Rover. And this actually is pretty good because it explains about Land Rover dropping the name Land Rover, switching to JLR, and a little more on the House of Brand strategy. So I'm going to read some good portions of this.
Been a little bit less than straightforward about it thus far. We need a little more understanding.
Just 16 months ago, JLR renamed itself JLR. Oh, sorry, I shortened it. It's Jaguar Land Rover renamed itself JLR, expanded its 2 brands to 4, and surprisingly shuffled its Story Land Rover nameplate to what appears to be mostly symbolic ceremonial position in the new House of Brands. Company representatives never really explained their thinking, but Motor Trend interviews with JLR COO Leonard Hornick and Range Rover Managing Director Geraldine Ingram have shed a little more light on what exactly is happening to Land Rover. They're quick to point out the familiar green logo, which they've taken to calling a trust mark, will still appear on the vehicles and will represent core principles like off-road capability. Whether it will appear on every former Land Rover product remains to be seen, though, as Ingram explained, removing badges is part of our reductive design strategy.
Oh dear, there's those words again.
Hornick is more defensive. The Land Rover badge is, he says, a critical mark and will be refined going forward, not eliminated. He's also quick to point out the company's burgeoning Land Rover Classic division, which is restoring classic models in-house for whale-heeled owners. What neither will say directly is why they don't believe Land Rover has the same brand equity it once had. Reducing it to a badge and a restoration shop with no clear explanation why suggests a belief it can no longer sell cars the way it used to. Supporting this hypothesis is something Chief Creative Officer Jerry McGovern told us when the move was first announced. Quote, "The reality is Range Rover is already a brand. So is Defender. We love the Land Rover name, but it doesn't have as much equity as Range Rover, and Defender is rising fast." Quote, in other words, Land Rover is old news. McGovern went on to point out, people tell us they drive a Range Rover, not a Land Rover. Between the success of products like the Range Rover and Defender and the company's long confusing naming scheme, is it really a Land Rover, Range Rover, SV Autobiography, LWB? Yes, technically it is. The buying public seems to have lost interest in the Land Rover part of the name in favor of the model in their driveway, and JLR seems to see more success to be had in embracing this reality than fighting it. Under the new system, each brand, including Jaguar, has its own managing director who reports to Hornick, and each brand gets its own special attention up to and including separate meetings with the boss to chart its course. Hornick and Ingram are convinced the brands will have little trouble standing on their own. Range Rover, as Ingram points out, is already a strong independent range of vehicles. What's more, most Defender buyers are new to the brand. That kind of relaunch has him convinced a standalone Defender brand will do just fine. He's less buoyant on Discovery. The least famous former Land Rover brand has lots of loyal fans, Hornick says, and does steady business. It's apparently not enough, though, because he also says we are reimagining Discovery completely. Whether it will get its total and complete reboot like Jaguar is currently experiencing remains to be seen. But he seems to imply that the current Discovery and Discovery Sport aren't cutting it in light of what Defender is doing. An underlying theme emerged in speaking separately with Hornick, Ingram, Glover, and McGovern. Trust us, we know what we're doing. Each allude to a grand long-term plan, which they're reluctant to fully explain, but assure us will all make sense in the end. We're over the hurdle, Hornick says. We've got it figured out. The public just needs to be patient and wait for the new product to gradually roll out, it seems. JLR North American Vice President of Communications, Stuart Shore, reiterates, quote, it's a long-term strategy, and you haven't seen so many things that are coming, unquote. So a little more clarity, but also maybe not as much.
Still clear as mud to me.
Well, trust them. They know what they're doing.
Jerry says so must be right.
Yeah, I'm still spicy that when this all went down, they could have waited just 1 month.
Yeah, the timing was pretty bad, and I do agree with them in that tacking the Land Rover in front of the Range Rover makes a lot of words. So there's a certain amount of status that comes with owning a Range Rover, and you might be able to argue that the Land Rover name dilutes that a little bit. I don't know how to feel about that, but it seems to me that the Land Rover name would help the Defender and the Discovery more than it hurts it.
Very possible. That's a good question, Harold. They seem to think they know better, but then they also renamed here in North America. They renamed Discovery. They renamed Freelander to be something different because they were trying to change the perception of the brand. Is this another one of those ideas where, we'll change the name, so to speak, only then they've changed it back. They have gone back to calling it Discovery here in North America instead of the LR5.
Right.
I do hope they know what they're doing. And yes, it has been confusing. People think that you own a Range Rover and instead of just a generic Land Rover. But
yeah. However, this change isn't going to help that.
All right, let's move on to JLR to spend £3 billion more on revamp in slow EV shift. JLR plans to spend a further £3 billion, which is $3.8 billion, in its strategic overhaul as the British maker of luxury SUVs reacts to slower global shift to electric vehicles. The manufacturer said its vehicles increasingly planned investment to £18 billion over 5 years to support its strategy of having fully electric options for all models by the end of the decade. The higher spend is partly due to slower EV demand. This means JLR will have to keep developing internal combustion engine and plug-in hybrid versions for longer in some markets. Quote, given the global transition to battery electric vehicles is going slower and more globally patchy than many expected, unquote, said Chief Financial Officer Richard Molyneux. He said further, quote, we're learning from others that have gone before us, making sure our powertrains are perfect, unquote. They're spending more money. I guess it sounds like they're lengthening the time. They're going to have to put more money into keeping the plug-in versions and I guess the ICE engines going. And then moving to the revival of the Freelander name, and this is from Automotive News Europe, how JLR solved its China problem. When reviving the discontinued Land Rover Freelander in China with its joint venture partner Chery Automotive, JLR has fixed the problem of what to do with the joint venture's factory in Changshu near Shanghai. JLR ended production of the Freelander in 2014, but the UK automaker and Chery are relaunching the SUV as an electrified model. The new version of the SUV will be built in Changshu. It will be launched first in China and then exported to other markets. JLR has built lower profit models at the plant for the past 10 years, but its business model has since shifted towards more luxurious segments that are highly profitable but sell in lower volumes. This means the plant was becoming surplus to requirements. Chery will build a family of Freelander branded full electric and extended range electric vehicles in the factory. The models will be based on a Chery architecture. Local news reports say the architecture will be on a premium electrified platform used by Chery. Sales will initially focus on China, but are also destined for export, quote unquote, over time, JLR said in June. And Chery is China's biggest exporter of vehicles. The new Freelanders are mainstream and will not come under JLR's luxury-focused house of brands marketing and sales strategy, JLR said. Under the deal, Chery licenses the Freelander name in return for JLR getting half of any profits. And there's a lot more to that article, but those are your highlights.
It sounds to me like they're pimping out the Freelander name.
Yeah, pretty much. China is no longer their biggest market. It's the U.S., and I suspect it has something to do with the luxury strategy. So I think having the another house of brands, even though we may not see it that way, that is at a lower price point, makes sense for the China market.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a house of brands or if it's just, like I said, licensing the name out and Chery's doing their own thing with it. They're the ones designing it. They're the ones building it. They're the ones selling it. It's just they kick the money back to JLR.
Next, just keeping track of the Land Rover website, the Jaguar Land Rover website. I saw another article about them being appointed the official manufacturer of King Charles. They still have on their website, by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen, manufacturers of vehicles. Someone apparently is not listening to the podcast. Anybody there at JLR, you may want to go update your website.
At least the pronouns.
And next, JLR class action alleges company records sells driver data. So a new JLR class action lawsuit alleges the automaker installs tracking software in its vehicles that surreptitiously records driver behavior and other personal data. Plaintiffs Hupper and Wood claim their 2023 Defender 110 supports driver tracking software or applications that can be used to collect drivers' data. They claim JLR fails to notify drivers their customer data will also be collected and or sold to third parties, some of which may resell the data to insurance companies, potentially resulting in higher auto insurance quotes or premiums. Quote, the software and applications allow JLR to record, store, transmit data not just about vehicle condition, for example, engine or transmission status, but also driver behavior, unquote, the plaintiff's claim in the JLR class action lawsuit. That's the details there. As a IT person, I'm glad that they have done this because this kind of stuff needs to be brought to light.
It's a real big issue in terms of privacy. I think these companies really should not be collecting this kind of data and passing it along without consent.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I can see collecting the data. We revised that statement. I can see collecting the data, but definitely selling it without permission or consent. To me, that's where they can.
I don't think they should be collecting it, period. But yeah, definitely not selling it without consent. That to me seems illegal. But collecting it, I know, it should be. But collecting it at all, I think, just puts you at risk for that information getting out into the wrong hands.
If they were to collect it and anonymize it, that you don't know specific drivers and what they're doing, but I could certainly see collecting it to know, is this feature working? Is it doing what you expect it to do? Could you improve it? Or is it doesn't make any sense?
Or is it popular?
Or is it popular? Does it make sense to put money into something to develop it further if no one's using it, whatever that might be?
Sure, if it's anonymized, but yeah, the fact that it's readily identifiable is a problem for me.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
For me, it's just one more reason to not buy new vehicles.
I think you see that happening now, even with an increase in folks buying used cars. I think that's one of the reasons, not being in control of your data, especially here in the US. I think this also happens in other countries. All right, moving on to Range Rover House inside these exclusive sanctuaries. And this is from a company called Sharp Magazine, but it's a little insight into the Range Rover House. It would be a gross understatement to say Range Rover House has been a success. More than 40 of these exclusive brand sanctuaries have popped up in 20 countries around the world, becoming a hot ticket for the brand's best customers and enthusiasts. For a few days or a few weeks, invited guests to Range Rover have the opportunity to enjoy some of the greatest examples of modernist architecture in the world, along with the world's most luxurious vehicles. These are once-in-a-lifetime experiences.
So they're like high-end pop-up stores?
They are high-end pop-up stores. Quoting Geraldine Ingram, managing director of Range Rover, our clients are seeking more intimate, memorable experiences which offer an emotional connection beyond a traditional car showroom. As such, Range Rover House will continue to expand its reach across the globe as we widen our offerings, with reservations opening for our fully electric Range Rover later this year. Further, we are at an exciting time in Range Rover's sixth decade, reimagining the future through sustainability-rich luxury experiences as we move at pace to electrify the world's most beautiful SUV, unquote, she added. So they have different Range Rover houses, and I'll just list you the locations here. The Mykonos in Greece. You probably heard about the one we talked about in Carmel here in California. They had one in Italy. They had one in France, Whistler, Canada, in Korea, Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, one in Taiwan, Singapore, Beijing, and China. I suspect as this is a working strategy for them, they will continue to do it.
Now, will each one of these pop-up stores come with their own special edition Range Rover, or was that just the Carmel that did that?
That's a good question, Harold. The only one I've seen is that Carmel edition, but maybe
Of which they made, what, 15 of them or something like that?
17.
Oh, okay.
Even if only the 17 people that buy it know that's that exclusive, I think that's the cachet there.
And I wonder if the quantity of 17 is because the 17-mile drive. It's a road in Carmel, which is, if you have to ask how much it costs to live there, you can't afford it.
That's right. That the 17-mile drive is the reason they did the 17 versions.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Next up is the Range Rover Sport Electric is already out for testing. And Range Rover is charging ahead with its second EV out for testing. The Range Rover Sport Electric was caught out in the wild ahead of the brand's first electric SUV official debut later this year. After opening orders in December, Range Rover EV had over 16,000 buyers lined up by February. Last month, Range Rover said the wait list had reached 38,000, more than doubling in just a few months. Range Rover also said its in-house propulsion enables the brand's first EV to exceed its already renowned performance on low-grip surfaces, ensuring all-terrain, all-weather, and all-surface capability, unquote. The electric Range Rover is equipped with a new traction control system, a brand first for improved control in slippery conditions. If you're of Scottish or Pittsburgh descent, we would say slippy. Little Easter egg there for you. Range Rover is testing the electric SUV in extreme weather conditions before it takes the sheets off later this year. Ahead of its debut, Range Rover's second EV, the electric Sport, has also been spotted testing. Like the brand's first EV, the Range Rover Sport Electric will be based on the MLA architecture with a 800-volt system, a 100 kilowatt-hour battery. The smaller EV is expected to get over 310 miles WLP trip. What's WLTP? Don't know what that is offhand. I assume that's a range. WLTP range.
It's not ringing bells for me.
Moving on. The Range Rover.
I wonder if that's some sort of standardized testing protocol of some sort.
The Range Rover Electric is expected to show its face for the first time later this year, with the brand's first EV debuting later this year. A 2025 launch cannot be ruled out. CEO Adrian Mardell said earlier this year we talked about 6 Land Rovers by 2026. The reality is we're likely to have 6 JLR products by 2026. They are expected to include the Range Rover Electric and Sport and 2 smaller models, possibly the Evoque and the Velar. The other 2 will be Jaguar. The Defender is also poised to be an EV replacement with a smaller option expected to launch.
It seems to me if they're going to position Jag as an all-electric brand, that's where the heavy part of the focus should be.
But as a Land Rover focused podcast, we only see adjacent information about Jaguar. And next, the most ambitious Land Rover Defender ever. Go big or go home. This is a Globe and Mail out of Canada. They did a ride along with the Octa. So I'll read you parts of that. That was really interesting. In retrospect, a 6-point racing harness would have been a good idea. That is what crosses my mind as the driver seated next to me crushes the accelerator pedal. In the process, he sends what is possibly the most capable luxury SUV in the world hurtling towards an imposing mound of dirt in the near distance. It's the kind of obstacle that typically convinces someone to hammer on the brakes. But in this case, no. We're seated in a pre-production version of the Defender Octa, the model referred to as the most dynamic Defender vehicle ever created. Now, if proven true, the statement alone is saying something. The original Defender, introduced in 1948, and those on the podcast know it was the series truck, has successfully tackled all manner of off-road adventures from the start. Here's what the mad scientists at JLR Special Vehicle Operations have wrought. This will be the most powerful and fastest Defender in the lineup. A twin turbocharged 4.4-liter mild hybrid V8 replaces the standard V8 that powers all other Defenders. The engine creates 626 horsepower, 553 pound-feet of torque, a 0 to 100 km/h time of 4 seconds flat, and a maximum potential top speed of 250 km/h. It's ridiculously fast, especially for a large and largely squarish SUV. If the above performance numbers look familiar, they should. The Defender Octa shares the same engine as the recently released Range Rover Sport SV, currently the highest performing model in the Range Rover lineup. There are other mechanical bits and pieces the two vehicles share. Among these is the 6D Dynamics suspension system with its hydraulically interlinked components, an approach that's more often used with supercars. The ride height is boosted to 28 millimeters, which helps to create the greatest wading depth of any production Defender in history, up to 1 meter of your liquid of choice. The Octa rides on 33-inch diameter tires, also a record for any production Defender. In addition to the typical drive modes found on the latest Defender, there's also the bespoke Octa mode. Pressing and holding the Octa button on the steering wheel triggers a special off-road launch control program and a unique ABS program that allows for more tire slip on loose surfaces, which actually shortens braking distances. The braking system itself features a 40-centimeter front discs and 6 opposed Brembo calipers. Again, this is the kind of stuff typically reserved for supercars. First impressions. Fit of the Defender Octa with those racing harnesses, weld in a roll cage, add a fire extinguisher or two, and you're ready to tackle the Dakar Rally. It's that good. The new Defender Octa can be reserved right now through retailers across Canada. While final pricing has not been set, manufacturers' indicative pricing starts at $175,000 Canadian. So you can buy a rally car, a production rally car. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, it would seem that way.
All right, next is the 2024 Land Rover Defender loses one of its most unique features. The Defender is one of only a few vehicles on sale in the U.S. that is still available with steel wheels. Steel wheels, or steelies, are typically associated with inexpensive cars, but also look great and are cheaper to replace on off-road vehicles like the Defender. Unfortunately, it seems as though very few people order the Defender with the steelies because Land Rover will no longer offer this option for the 2024 model year. We talked about this last month, but we have a little more info this month on it. In their place, the Land Rover will sell what it calls 20-inch Style 9013 gloss white wheels. The Style 9013 wheels look just like the steel ones, but they are actually made from aluminum, so they are lighter. While the new aluminum wheels look similar to the steelies, they will cost more to repair or replace if they're damaged. However, they are significantly lighter. The outgoing steelies were only 18 inches to keep the weight down, but the 9013s can be 2 inches bigger without adding any weight. The wheels themselves cost around $1,800, but are only available with a $600 county exterior pack that is bundled with other options, totaling $5,650. Land Rover forces you to equip the Defender with 20-inch full-size spare, $100, Robustech ebony veneer, $600, illuminated metal tread plates, $600, Tasman blue paint, $950, and a white contrast roof, $1,000. If you want the steely look-alike wheels with any other color besides Tasman blue, it's not available. Land Rover will offer the Style 9013 wheels on the 110 and 90 body styles only, but not on the longer 130. RIP Steelies, I think, is what that means.
At least from the factory, I suspect there's still some aftermarket support there. But is this a current article? Because they're saying that they will no longer, starting with the 2024 model year. Aren't we mostly done with the 2024 model year?
I think this special one, this Tasman, the county, this is the county edition, or like the county edition they came out with. I think by the time they came out with it and announced it, it was this summer.
Oh, okay.
Or it's possible, or you're right, Harold. Maybe it's a 2025 model year and they just have a typo.
It just seems weird to be saying that they will no longer offer it for the 2024 Defender, unless it's a mid-24 change.
Or they finally got around to coming out with the Steelies and didn't want to wait for 2025.
Who knows? But I suspect somebody in the aftermarket will have them. So if you want steel wheels, buy your Defender with whatever the cheapest wheel option is, and then just buy your wheels in the aftermarket.
Next, another excellent Jalopnik article. Land Rover is once again charging $370,000 for a Range Rover no one will ever notice is special. Speaking of the Carmel edition. If you want to step up from a Range Rover Sport to a full-size Range Rover, it's going to cost you a cool $170,900. For the cost of 1 year's college tuition, you can get a comfortable, luxurious SUV that Land Rover says makes 394.5 horsepower. The just revealed 2024 Range Rover SV Carmel Edition, on the other hand, starts at $370,000. So what the heck did Land Rover do to make this particular special edition more than $250,000 more expensive than a regular Range Rover? The Range Rover has done for the last several years with a Carmel Edition. It stuffed the SUV with all luxury features it could possibly think of. You get bespoke green satin paint, 23-inch wheels, sequoia green and perlino aniline leather, embroidered seats and cushions, dark veneers and black ceramic dials, as well as a 606 horsepower twin-turbo V8.
So in other words, they changed the color and tripled the price.
But there's more, Harold. Land Rover gave the 2024 Carmel Edition 24-karat gold badging. And as before, only 17 will be made. Don't worry, though. This isn't conspicuous consumption for the sake of conspicuous consumption. Buying a $370,000 Range Rover is an act of charity, since Land Rover says it will donate $5,000 from the sale of every unit to Del Monte Forest Conservancy.
$5,000.
Of the $370,000.
So you could buy the $107,000 Range Rover and donate $5,000 yourself to this organization and be $240,000 ahead.
And you could probably get gold paint and outline the Range Rover badging and be ahead. Because do you really need 24-karat gold?
Yeah, and it's only plating. It's not like they're solid. They're just plated. So you could pop those letters off of your cheap Range Rover, so to speak, send them out and have them plated. Or just get some gold paint, or just do without.
They're outlined, too. It's not like they're completely gold, the whole lettering. That's the Carmel Edition. And another new edition, the 2025 Range Rover Sport SV Edition 2 brings new colors. So the 2025 Range Rover Sport SV gets a new Edition 2 as a successor to last year's Edition 1. The Edition 2 includes 4 unique themes that pair paint colors with specific interior trims. Each theme uses a considerable amount of carbon fiber, including the hood and wheels made from the material.
Does that mean next year there'll be an Edition 3?
Mechanically, the Edition 2 matches the Edition 1 with a monstrous 626 horsepower twin turbocharged 4.4-liter V8, pushing 553 pound-feet of torque and made it to an 8-speed automatic transmission. We haven't had a chance to strap our testing instruments to one, but according to Land Rover, it can launch to 60 miles per hour in 3.6 seconds. This is from Car and Driver. Land Rover hasn't revealed pricing for the Sport SV Edition 2 yet, but we expect it to be close to last year's $180,000 starting figure.
I just wonder how that performance compares with the stock Range Rover Sport.
We're moving on. 7 important 2024 Land Rover Defender 130 game-changing features. So there's 7 things you need to know about the Defender 130, especially if you're going to purchase one. And this is from Motor Biscuit. They drove a 130 from Charlotte, North Carolina to Virginia and back to Asheville, North Carolina. Number 1, extra equipment creates blind spots. Some of the extras include an extendable ladder on one side for roof access and a medical box for storage on the others. These items stuck out on the sides of the SUV, blocking my view while merging into traffic and changing lanes. Perhaps you could keep your emergency supplies inside the vehicle, or the ladder could be moved to the rear. Number 2, the interior isn't 100% utilitarian. The carpet in the first and second rows was an odd touch. Sure, it's soft and comfortable to provide an upscale feeling. There's rubber throughout the rest of the vehicle, though. Number 3, the Defender 130 is more comfortable than other off-roaders. The 2024 Defender 130 is a little loud at highway speeds, but it's not painfully loud like the Wrangler or the Ford Bronco. It's slightly loud for a luxury vehicle, though. The ride is a bit stiff and rigid, but the Defender 130 handles it in a sportier nature compared to the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. Number 4, the tech can be confusing. I didn't have a problem using the touchscreen menus or adjusting the HVAC controls. However, if I wasn't taught how to use the tech, I would have had a learning curve to tackle. For example, you have to push a dial in and then spin it to adjust your air conditioning strength. The system is British, so it's a bit difficult from what we're used to here with American SUVs and sometimes seems to include unnecessary steps. 5, the MPG rating is accurate. I had a model with a 3-liter V6 gas engine with 395 horsepower, 406 pound-feet of torque. It's a fun engine with a smooth power delivery. It can accelerate from 0 to 60 in about 6.3 seconds. The 130 gets an EPA estimated 16 miles per gallon in the city and 18 on the highway. I hovered around 17.3 for my entire week, which included city errands, trips down the highway, and light off-roading. Number 6, there's plenty of space. The 2024 Defender can comfortably flip to 8 adults. It has also plenty of cargo space for everyone's stuff. There's 43.5 cubic feet of cargo space behind the second row and 76.1 cubic feet behind the front row. My model had power folding second row seats, and it does provide a level cargo floor. That level cargo floor, I think, is that new for the latest model Defender? Because wasn't it a little bulge at some point?
I seem to recall there being some gripes about that. And when you fold the seats, it doesn't make the floor flat. So it sounds like maybe they've done something about that.
Or maybe it's only in the 130?
That could be.
We'll have to keep our eyes open on that. This edition of the 130 was the outbound, so it has the rear seat delete. So it's just cargo for that throw.
Maybe that's why the floor is flat.
And the seventh one, the Defender 130 looks good. The 130 model flexed a shade of Eiger gray paint with black accents and privacy windows. It really draws the eye, and it received multiple compliments throughout the week. So that's 7 things to know especially if you're going to be considering buying a 130, especially this is the outbound edition. I seem to recall it's the outbound edition. Next, a Defender marks 70 years of its landmark humanitarian charity partnership with the British Red Cross. Defender will celebrate a landmark moment in its relationship with the British Red Cross as it marks 70 years of its humanitarian partnership, one of the longest standing charity partnerships of its kind in the world. Defender can trace its roots back to the very first series Land Rover, which made its world debut at the Amsterdam Motor Show in April of 1948 and entered service with the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement in 1954. This marks 70 years since the first vehicle, a specially adapted model, used as a mobile dispensary, went into service in the deserts of Dubai. Defender's commitment to supporting communities in crisis continues with the announcement of the latest flagship project appropriately located in Italy, the birthplace of the world's largest humanitarian organization 160 years ago. A specially equipped Defender 130 emergency response vehicle has been handed over to the Italian Red Cross. Fitted with advanced satellite communications hardware, the 130 will provide continuous nationwide connection and access in some of the most hard-to-reach disaster-hit locations in the country.
Yeah, I didn't know that the Red Cross started in Italy.
I didn't know that either, actually. I didn't realize it had been on for 160 years. That's a long time. And they have some pictures here of when the original Series 1 in 1954 was dispatched to Kenya, the first mobile dispensary. And then in 1968, it's at a Series 2, 2A.
Something like that, yes.
It's tough to tell, but it looks like a 107?
If it was new, it would have been a 2A. It's a 109.
Oh, 109 then? Okay.
Yeah, because 1968 would have been 2A production.
Oh, there's a here 1977. Those are all 3s. There's a 3, looks like an ambulance and a 110. And then between 2008 and 2009, Defenders were used in Turks and Caicos and the Cayman Islands. So they got some nice pictures out there of Defenders and series trucks helping out with the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. And next, I was hoping Dixon would be with us because this is a very Canadian story. Joey Smallwood's Land Rover is touring Newfoundland for 75th anniversary of Confederation. It's a 1958 Land Rover, so that'd be a Series 2, and it's been restored, and it is said to be the first automobile to have ever driven across the island. It's the first official vehicle to cross Newfoundland, driven by Joey Smallwood, 1958, said Carl Hamlin, president of the Newfoundland Antique and Classic Car Club. And I looked it up. Joey Smallwood was the first premier of Newfoundland. This year, the Land Rover will be visiting historic sites across the island as part of the tour, making the 70th anniversary of Newfoundland joining the Confederation with Canada. Quote, Joey wanted to see everyone in the province, so he set out in his official company vehicle and he visited the entire island. And that was just when the roads were being pushed through. So the roads were rough. It's in the weeds right now. It's probably the way it was when he drove it across the province. Apparently they restored it. It's a good-looking vehicle. And it apparently was the official first automobile of Newfoundland.
Yeah, Newfoundland's not a big place. I wonder how long it took him to drive around it.
So that's what we need Dixon for.
We need our resident semi-Canadian to fill us in on these details.
And finally, is this the most creative hearse ever? Meet Engine 710's Defender funeral car. It's been built by Edinburgh-based Land Rover specialist Engine 710 as a custom-made vehicle for William Purvis, whose funeral director had a large role to play in its creation. The result is a 110 which uses parts from a 130 and given many accessories to pair it for funeral service. A go anywhere but there funeral service, clearly. That's in the article. Those include a lower deck to allow coffins and tributary items to be better displayed, and a revision to all doors and hinges to provide easier access in and around the car. 710 has also thrown in new LED lighting, pull-out drawers which contain a bespoke set of umbrellas, alongside a complete rework of the interior with only the front 2 seats remaining. There's plenty of wood veneer spotted around the equally wood coffin table, with a double sunroof has been attached, able to provide more lighting.
It looks like a 110 station wagon. If you look, it's a 130. It's longer. It's not as cool as the other Edinburgh hearse, as in the one commissioned by the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yes.
That one was cool.
That was his bespoke one too, because he had that. He helped design that one himself.
Yeah, it took him 17 years to design that. So I'm glad he got an early start on it.
Now there's one that you can use if you're in Scotland. You can have a Defender transport you.
Well, and this one, I will say, will keep the casket more dry than the Duke's hearse.
Good point. Oh, they didn't. They took the Defender name off the bonnet.
But the green oval is still on the grill.
Yes, it is.
So they're willing to admit it's a Land Rover.
All right, that's the news for August of 2024. Welcome to the CentreSteer podcast. Bob Steele. Bob is a longtime listener and a friend of mine. I think it's fair to say, Bob, I've known you for a number of years now. You're part of ANARC, and it's about time we got you on the show to understand, where does Bob Steele fit into the Land Rover community? So welcome, Bob.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here. Hello, Harold. Hello, Morgan. It's a pleasure.
Hey, Bob, and thank you for your support of our show through the years. It's good to have you on finally.
Yes.
I love you guys. I do a lot of traveling, and I always have you close to me when I'm traveling. So thank you for always being out there and making my travels that much better.
We can get you from one fuel stop to the next.
Will you be listening to yourself?
I don't know. I'll certainly share this with my grandchildren and my kids.
Fair. Okay. We need to do
We're
it.
the radio star. Grandpa's a radio star.
What is radio?
Yeah, that's John. I think that's more of what they're going to say.
Radio is live podcasting.
Exactly. Yes.
It's live stream without an internet connection.
Exactly.
Bob, how long have you been a Land Rover person?
In 1991, I purchased my first Land Rover. What is that, 33 plus years now?
Yeah. How did that happen? Were you a car person? Did you have a family member, your dad or somebody that was a car person, got you into vehicles?
No, although I was. My first vehicle that I purchased when I was in college, architecture school at Virginia Tech, was a BMW 1602, a 1968, a nice model, same body as the 2002. So I got into the BMW world, and actually I drove BMWs up until the time I bought my first Range Rover, although that happened by accident. As an architect, my accountant had told me that it was okay to buy a vehicle. He explained to me this whole wonderful thing we have in our tax code, that if you buy a vehicle over 6,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, you get a tax write-off.
It's a commercial truckness.
Right, a pickup truck. I started shopping. I'd had my architecture studio, my practice for 3 years at that point. And of course, I was fledgling, struggling young architect. I went into private practice at the age of 29 years old. And I was very fortunate to have some very good clients. And while I never really took a break those first 3 years, I did have a young son, and I realized getting him in and out of the back seat of my, at that point, a BMW 3 Series wasn't practical. So I decided, hey, there's this new thing in America with SUVs. I'm going to go look at SUVs. The tragic thing is I bought a Toyota Land Cruiser. Literally, now here's the best part of the story, John. I put the money down on it one evening. It was a white one. I have an affinity for white vehicles. I go into my studio the next day, and I had, 6 or 7 of these young architects working for me. And I told them about it. And one of them just went ballistic and said, Bob, you're an architect. You can't drive a Toyota Land Cruiser. You need to go check out a Range Rover. And I was totally taken back. I was like, what is a Range Rover? I didn't really know what they were. And I have to this day to thank Dan Ensminger, who's a young architect at the time working for me. Dan and I are still friends after all these years.
But Dan steered me towards Range Rovers. And at that point, there were no Land Rover dealerships, right? But Richmond had a Range Rover dealer where you could buy a Saab, a Jag, a Porsche, or a Range Rover. The next morning, after I'd been told I did
You had gone the wrong
other
path.
architects with my staff the mistake I had made, I went out at lunchtime and took a test drive and was blown away. I will say, as an architect, the aesthetic of the Range Rover, I think it's one of the most beautiful vehicles ever crafted, ever designed. That classic body style is truly spectacular as an architect. But the ride up, holy cow. Then I had to deal with the Toyota dealership because the night before I'd put money on it. But fortunately in Virginia, there's a law that for 3 days, you can back out of the purchase of a vehicle. So thank goodness that law is on the books. I believe it's still on the books.
Pennsylvania has the same law.
And of course, the salesperson at the Range Rover dealership was more than happy to assist me to get out of that contract.
Oh, you know
The
they were.
Toyota
Oh,
dealer.
yes.
You drive over to the dealer in the Range Rover to cancel your papers?
Exactly. So I drove at lunchtime. This was back in the day where you just signed for it. You drove it off the lot, right? I drove a Range Rover Hunter, which the reason I got the Hunter versus the County at that point was I did have this young son who you can imagine all the goldfish and food and snacks that come out of his little car seat in the back there. And I had a large black lab, 125-pound black lab named Stanley. So Stanley and Tyler, I was a single dad at the point. So the three of us went everywhere together. So that was the reason for the SUV. And at the time, I didn't really know about the off-road world, right? It was more just functional. Hey, I'm an architect. I do a lot of traveling around the mid-Atlantic, and I need a good, reliable vehicle, which we can laugh about. Is a Land Rover really reliable? But to me, it was, right? A new vehicle with a warranty. So that's how I came into my first Hunter, my first Range Rover, and I owned that vehicle. And my son Tyler, who I bought it for, actually drove it while I was in college. But that vehicle made it over 320,000 miles.
Wow. Wow.
I drove it hard. Now, it had a couple motors in there. I have a lot of friends who do work here in Virginia, and I could lean on them to keep it on the road. But finally, it met its end due to rust and everything. But that's the story of how I came into my first Land Rover. It was in 1991, just happened to have an architect on my staff who pointed out the error of my ways and pointed me towards a Range Rover. And I'll always be indebted to Dan. And so anyways, I then discovered the world that we all share, right? The world of enthusiasts, all the wonderful people out there. I've traveled every state on land, right? I haven't driven it to Alaska or Hawaii yet, but I've driven my Land
I want to see that drive.
Yeah. I am planning on going to Alaska. We were actually planning on going in 2020, a couple others. And of course, the pandemic threw everything out the window, and we just haven't been able to find a date that works. But that is going to come up in the next few years where we make the trip up there. So that's the odd story. I knew nothing about Land Rover. I knew nothing about Range Rover. But the vehicle was so good, and it made such a difference in my young son's life. Again, I'm a single dad at that point, with a young son and a dog. And that was the perfect vehicle for my life and what it allowed me to do, to go camping on weekends with them, to go visit family and friends. That Range Rover Classic was very dear to us. And my son still has wonderful stories about it. By the way, Mike McKeag has it in his back pasture at Penland Farm. And if you come to Mar this year for the 30th anniversary, it's parked right next to Sandy Grice's Discovery. Our two trucks are sitting there in Mike McKeag's field. So it's a little bit of Rove history there. Sandy's and my trucks sitting there.
Is that the official Rove Museum?
Sounds like
I wouldn't call it a museum. Wait till you see these, Harold. There's things growing all over it. And you haven't been in Mike's school bus. But going to Penland Farm is a wonderful experience. That's where we hosted the first Mar in 1994. And Nancy McCaig and Mike, Sarah and their son Adam, they're dear friends. I love Mike McCaig, and Nancy and Sarah are wonderful. They're still a big part of Rove. Adam lives over in Germany. But it is a museum of sorts. And you'll go down memory lane if you come to Mar this year, because we will be going over to Penland Farm and driving some of those trails. And you'll see the pastures where the McCaigs were kind enough to let us camp and put up the big top tents and have all the festivities until we moved over to Pearls Pond later in the 1990s. But yeah, it's all good out there. Yeah, you can see my Honor. You can see the original truck. It's still there.
Literally put out to pasture.
Literally.
So we'll have to do some mowing just to be able to see it then.
On cutting back some trees. It's been sitting there for probably a dozen years now.
Oh, wow. So you got the truck in 91. Sounds like it was maybe 92, depending on how things went. How did you then find the Land Rover community? Because it sounds like that's about the time when Rove got started, or right shortly after Rove got started.
It's interesting. I did get him. I did purchase it in 1991, and it was a 1991 Hunter. Probably in about 92 or 93, I met a couple of people who were in the Blue Ridge Land Rover Club. It's now defunct, but it was a really strong club back at that time. Members from Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia were in it. And so the first club I joined was the Blue Ridge Land Rover Club in 1994. I think technically is when I joined. And people like the Richies, the Davidsons. John, you met my friend Tom Bruce out in Oregon. Tom and I first met each other in 1994 and have stayed friends. He's out in Boise now. So I met a lot of really wonderful people in the Blue Ridge Club.
How did you find them? Was this a magazine, Rove magazine? Or is it one of these you're driving down the road and another Land Rover person waved and you guys pulled over and started talking?
Exactly. And I can't recall who it was, but yeah, that's how there was just this interaction, right? That's back in the day when everybody flashed their lights, waved. Right. It's who's that crazy person driving a Land Rover or Range Rover?
Right.
And we just happened to be talking, and they were a member of the club. And so that's how I started going to those events. And it wasn't until I think 1996 is when I joined Rove, because that's the first MAR that I went to. And it was actually, I met Nancy and Mike McCaig at a Blue Ridge event because they were in the Blue Ridge Club, as were a number of other Rove members. In fact, it was predominantly Virginians in the Blue Ridge Club. And that was a wonderful club. And the Davidsons, the Richies are always a couple events each year, just really solid events, really nice people out there. But then that's how I got into Rove. The first MAR that I attended was 1996 at Penland Farm at Nancy and Mike's place. And I had a blast. And there were maybe, I want to say maybe 70 trucks there. It was a small event back then. But that particular year, they had this black tie event. So there are people out there in these pastures, horse pastures, and Mike's a horseman, in tuxedos, and even more bizarre, in kilts. I had never seen so many people in kilts, which gets to my friend Robert Davis. Every time I see Robert Davis, I can't help but think of him in kilts, because not only at that particular event, the first time I met him, but many times after.
MAR I've been to, and I've seen Robert Davis. He's been in a kilt. Yes, especially on the dinner evening.
Right.
Yeah, makes you question whether he actually owns pants or not.
I've heard stories of the black tie event. That sounded like a fun thing to do. So it's October, I assume. And it was just like a dress up for the dinner, I take it?
Yeah, at the Saturday night dinner, I think they called it Elegance in the Rough or something like that.
Yes, that sounds familiar. Elegance in the Rough. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something like that. And I just remember going out there, and I actually threw my tuxedo in my Range Rover at the time, thinking, is this for real? Are they really going to wear tuxedos? I did it half thinking it was a joke, but as soon as I started seeing everybody walking over to the tent for the dinner, I realized, wow, I guess I got to get my tuxedo on, go over there. So that was my first MAR, was 1996. And I've been to 26 since. I missed the first two, this year being the 30th, September the end of September this year, but we're having the 30th MAR. I think Mike McCaig is the only one that's been to all 30. I think Nancy, she missed a couple. She's probably been to 28. I think Lawrence Michelin's been to 28. I've been to 26. My sister was really ill in 2008 and 9. She actually, unfortunately, passed away of colon cancer. She had a really bad bout with cancer.
Sorry to hear that.
So I spent those couple of years traveling to Texas as often as I could. So I really wasn't active in the club. Those were really the quiet years for me because of family. But having been to 26 Mars, you can imagine the cast of characters you get to know going to all those events. And not to mention things like Winter Romp and all these other events. What an interesting bunch.
Let's go back though, Bob. I know you have a proclivity to talk about other people and other events and activities and the greater community, but really want to focus on you during this podcast. That's the intent, sir, because you have been involved.
Understood. I'll do my best
for such a long time, and want to see how you want folks to understand how you fit into the community and what you've done for the community, because you've helped keep the Land Rover brand and fandom, if you will, moving here in North America, especially thanks to basically an ANARC, which we'll get to. But is the 91 Range Rover, was that, I assume, you quickly got another Rover?
Yes. How did you guess?
Because we're all part of the same team here.
I replaced it with a Toyota, did you?
I've never owned a Toyota. That's a good point, Harold. I hadn't thought about it. I've never owned a Toyota, but
yeah, you came dangerously close, though.
I sure did. My name was on it. 1997, after I got involved in Rove, and again, it was people like the McCaigs, Robert Davis, people who I got to know. I began to realize how wonderful series trucks are. Right here, I started out with a Range Rover Classic. And out in West Bygod, Virginia, the Blue Ridge Club, most of those participants out there had the newer vehicles. Very few, or had, say, Defenders. Very few had series trucks. That was interesting to me, how that club, there were a couple, but it wasn't until I joined Rove in 1996 and meeting the cast of characters that I did that I began to realize, wow, these series trucks are really special. Then I went down that rabbit hole, right? I bought a 109, a right-hand drive, 1966 Series 2A. Actually bought it over in the UK and imported it. My son called it the Beast. It was an ex-MOD.
Oh, nice.
So it was pretty beefy, pretty gnarly looking. It had been cut up and everything else.
Do you know where it served?
No. I have no idea. I was told it was near the water because there were hookups in it that had to do with air tanks.
Okay.
Now, I removed all of that. I didn't think to keep any of it, but apparently it had been fitted for scuba divers.
Oh, interesting.
So I didn't know, first off, I didn't think anybody in the UK knew what the water was, right? They don't seem to flock to the water like we do. But it had been set up with some gear in there.
That would make playing in the James River more fun.
It did. So I owned that truck for 17 years. That was a family favorite. Our kids loved it. It was a canvas top vehicle, excellent bed in the back. So my dog, Tyler, and then of course my family grew later, right? So I had more kids because Robin and I have a blended family. I was very fortunate to meet Robin in 2001. And she had 3 children. So all of a sudden we had 4 children in our family. And that 109 with that open back came in really handy for going through all the fields out of Pearl's Pond. But that was a really good truck. I did a lot of work on that truck. Les up at Rovers North, I got to know Les so well because I did a rebuild of the entire truck. And that was back when I was young and I could actually spend time doing it. I really enjoyed that one.
The Beast, I guess that's what you called that one.
Yeah,
did you take that just to Rove events, or did you get to travel and take it across country at all?
I took it everywhere.
Were you young and stupid and driving a series truck across the country?
Wow.
It
was at the 50th at Greek Peak.
Wow. Nice.
It only took me 12 hours to drive there.
Did you use it to entertain clients?
They got a good laugh out of it. None of them would ever ride with me.
But they found entertainment value in it, correct?
Oh, they sure did. It's
So you can expense that. That's a legitimate business expense.
there you go. I don't know that I did that, Harold. But I will say this: my clients, I have a really interesting practice. I'm blessed to have all these clients who know who I am. They love seeing my Land Rovers. They love it when I come out to their homes. I'm registered in 9 states from Florida to Maine. So I work all up and down the East Coast. Harold, I think I mentioned to you, I just finished a project just a few miles from you over in Ligonier.
Yep.
So I travel. And when I was younger, I could travel in a series truck. Now I don't know that I could do it, but that series, that 109, I bet, and I keep records on all my vehicles. I put over 100,000 miles on that truck, and it was the original engine. Now, when I bought it, it had 24,000 miles on the odometer. I don't know if that was accurate. It was still running strong.
What motor was in that?
Just the little...
The 2 1/4.
2 1/4 petrol? Yeah.
Yeah. And because it came out of the military, that may not be the original engine.
Exactly. That could be.
They swap engines every few months just when they need something to do.
So that's what I just don't know. But I did put over 100,000 miles on it in my 17 years. That's not a lot, right? You drive a truck 6,000 miles a year and it adds up.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's typically what I drove that 109. So it was very... Yeah, I had some breakdowns at events down in North Carolina, the Yawari Safari. I would take it there. It was up to events down east, West Connecticut Club, Bay State Rovers, right? It's been all over the Northeast, Vermont, up through Canada. So I love that truck. That truck was not the hardiest off-road, but I love driving and going places.
Is it also now out to pasture?
No, because before I sold it, not only did I do full mechanical on it, but I had David Gage down at Thatch Roof Garage. I don't know if anybody remembers David. I think he stopped doing this in probably 2012, I would say.
I remember that name.
Yeah, he used to do beautiful work. He was in the tip of Tennessee near the corner of Virginia there. He was in the Old North State Club, and David was doing this work. So I left the Beast with him for a couple months, and he did a fabulous job with the body. Total straightened all the panels. It was really a beautiful vehicle once he was done. So once it was so beautiful that, of course, I couldn't drive it off-road anymore. But I was at that point where I had probably a dozen other Land Rovers in my driveway. So this one was one that I drove family outings and take to events, much like I do with Bernie now. But that truck was perfect in every way, and I sold it to a friend. I have this habit of only selling my Land Rovers to people who I know and who I believe will care for them. So that truck went to a friend, John Bailey. He bought it from me, and he and his wife Preston enjoyed it for a while. Now they did sell it, so I'm not too sure where it is today, but that was a beautiful truck. I love the Beast. And my son, who's now 35, grew up in the bed of that truck. He has some wonderful memories of going out with his buddies and having a great time in the Beast.
Nice.
Sounds like he needs to get one of his own.
I agree with you, Harold.
So maybe track
I'll
down the
get
Beast.
to my family. All 4 of our children have owned Land Rovers and driven them. Most of them their first vehicle, but they don't drive Land Rovers now. Right? They drove them when they were young. All learned how to drive out in pastures, out at Penland or Pearl's Pond.
And you still claim them as children, even though they don't drive Land Rovers.
Yeah, I could hold that over their head. They now, Amelia, who is our oldest daughter, that's Robin's oldest daughter, my stepdaughter, Amelia, John, you would be proud. Her first vehicle was a Freelander.
Yes. Well done. Well done.
Robin and
it is a
I-
good car for girls.
Yeah, she is very smart. She owned it exactly 4 years and 49,500 miles and sold it and got a Honda. But she kept it while it was under warranty. She
Yes.
was living in Princeton, New Jersey at the time. And Robin and I wanted her to have a good, reliable vehicle. She had just graduated from the Culinary Institute. She owns restaurants now, but as a young woman, we wanted her to have something that she could cart all her gear back and forth. So the Freelander really was a great vehicle. She didn't have any issues with it. It was a good, reliable vehicle. So that was her first vehicle. Now, our youngest daughter, Lydia, who was 26, her first vehicle was an LR2.
Also a
Freelander too.
Freelander.
Yeah.
And that she actually is the opposite of older sister. She owned it for 10 years. We bought it for her when she learned how to drive at 16. Again, same thing as Amelia. We wanted her to have a good, reliable vehicle, and she drove it all through college, and it made it to 140,000 miles, but it's going to be put out to pasture right now. It has to get a whole new drivetrain, and she went and bought a Volkswagen.
There you go.
She had that. And then, of course, my son, Tyler, he didn't grow up in all these. He spent his whole life carting around with me. So poor Tyler, his first vehicle was the Hunter. He actually drove that truck from the time he learned how to drive at 16 through when he graduated from college at VCU. So he drove it for, I want to say, about 7 years. But then that's when that vehicle finally hit the end of its life. But I transferred all of the gear from that original Hunter into my Soft Dash 95 Classic that I then drove for about 8 or 9 years. Sarah McKay owns it now. You've probably seen Sarah driving it. That has the bones in it of my original 91 Hunter.
So what else have you owned then? So we have a 91 Range Rover, the first. You have the 109. I know you have a current model Defender.
I've owned over 40 Land Rovers.
Wow.
So I'm not going to bore you with all of them.
Wow.
It wouldn't be boring, but it'd be a very long show.
A lot of
That might meet our programming needs for the entire next year.
Yeah, I've owned a lot of Land Rovers, and I think that's part of the story, right? Because along the ways we make good decisions and we make poor decisions. The third Land Rover that I owned was perhaps the most perfect. It was a 1966 Series 2A 88 wagon. And it was perfect in every way. And again, Les helped me get it there. Bought it from a friend in the North Carolina club at the time, Chris Runoff. Beautiful truck. And we called it the Bomb. My kids at the time, I was like, what does the Bomb mean? That's how behind the time I am. But it was a beautiful vehicle. And our kids, in particular, Matthias, our second behind Amelia, Matthias loved driving the Bomb. And we would take it to all the events. John, imagine going to an event in North Carolina and I would have 3 vehicles there. I would have my Classic. Matthias would drive the Bomb. Robin and Lydia would take the Classic with Lydia in it, and I would drive with Tyler in the Beast. So we would take 3 Land Rovers to the event with all our gear and everything else, and it'd be a nice family outing with 3 Land Rovers there. And of course, all the kids who were old enough to drive, as they became old enough, they would all drive the trails. So Amelia, Matthias, Robin might be one of the best off-road, have some of the best skills of anyone out there, but she just doesn't do it anymore. But 25 years ago, she was tearing it up out on the trails, right? Just like our kids. So it was nice. Those are the 3 that I hold most dear, the first 3 that we have because they were so special to our family, right? Our kids grew up driving them and really enjoyed them. And I've owned, a good story for you is I never bought a Defender. And I've shared this conversation with friends at JL. I never bought one because I thought Land Rover sold out by taking series trucks and putting V8 motors in them and coils. I was like, I'm not going to support it. It's like some people are with the new Defender now, right? I'm not going to buy a new Defender I'm not going to go with the independent suspension, that I6. I'm not going to do it. That was me back when the Defenders came out, right? 94, 95, and 97. I could have bought a 110 or whatever. The dealership was all over me to get one because I was buying other vehicles, Discoveries and what have you. But I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm only going to drive series trucks. Those Defenders are not real Land Rovers, right? I think the Discovery was real. The Range Rover was real. But in my mind, and this was poor decision, I look back on it and go, what an idiot, which Robin loves to remind me. Why we never bought a Defender was silly, right? I couldn't embrace the change, right? I was like, the Range Rover and the Discovery can do it, but why did they get rid of the series truck? Those trucks are so nimble and light, and you have that little 2.25 motor, Harold. We can laugh at how much power it has, but it got you where you needed to go.
You could have gotten a Defender with a 2.5-liter petrol. It would have been the same underwhelming experience. Not new in this country, but yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, back in the 90s, you had to get the V8. And again, I had friends who bought them. One of my best friends, Mike Boggs, has a 110 and a 90. And I was like, Mike, you sold out, right? Now he's saying the same thing to me about buying the new Defender. Like, Bob, you sold out. I learned a lesson because I do think it was wrong not to embrace the change of Land Rover. And I think that's what I am proud of now is that I've owned a lot of 405s, 322s, sports, diesels, Discoveries, D2s, LR3s, LR4s. One of the reasons I've had over 40 Land Rovers is I have embraced all the different model lines at different points. And some of it is our children driving them. Robin's driven probably 6 or 7 Land Rovers, because if we were going to be married, she wasn't going to drive a Mercedes. She was going to drive a Land Rover, right? So anyways, that's the one mistake I look back on, and I acknowledge it. I should have been more open to it, and that's why I was so open to the new Defender. A lot of my friends, my diehard buddies who have owned probably as many trucks or more than I have, are all like, Bob, you sold out. I can't believe you put in an early order to get a new Defender. I look back on it and I just did it thinking I was getting a vehicle that I could haul our Airstream with. I didn't think I was going to off-road with it because all the stories I heard originally were these vehicles couldn't do anything. And Land Rover Richmond made me feel very special when I got the first one in Virginia. So my Defender, my 2020 Defender, was the first one titled in Virginia. It's now, over 4 years old. I think I took possession of it in early June in 2020, right during the pandemic. I think you recall all the stories about how vehicles sat at the port. Mine was one of those. It was actually ready to be delivered in early March, but they shut the ports down. Or maybe it was late March and they shut the ports in early March. But it got hung up for 3 or 4 months at port. But that's one of the best things I did, right, was get that Defender, because when I bought it, I still had my classics and some older trucks still in my garage and driveway. But that vehicle changed the way that Robin and I can enjoy our Land Rover friends. I've got over 80,000 miles on it now. It's driven across the Rockies 8 times. John, you saw me. I was out there in Oregon. I drove it out to Oregon and back. That was over 7,000 miles. I just drove it over 3,200 miles to Minnesota and back, hauling our 25-foot Airstream. Or let me be clear, Robin's 25-foot Airstream. It's not mine. It's hers. She don't want any of my stinky, smelly Land Rover friends in it.
Sure.
So the utilitarian side of the Defender when I bought it was so that Robin and I would have a vehicle to haul the Airstream, to go to the beach with our kids and our dogs. I love that the seats fold flat. Sounds crazy, but when you got a couple big black labs, you need seats that fold flat.
Mm-hmm.
It was when we took Oxford across America, and you guys were such great supporters and proponents of David and Mike making that trip. That was the first time I drove it off-road. I took it out to Utah, met Mike and David there, and then drove the whole way through Utah and Colorado with them. And that's when I began to realize this truck actually is pretty incredible, right? Because I have rigs, other vehicles that I've used off road in, and not that I'm have the off road chops that some of our friends do, but I drive off road a lot. And I was taken aback with what the new Defender can do. So over time, I've leaned on a number of my friends to help me create a purposeful build that's exactly what Robin and I need. We can still haul our Airstream like we did. Harold, you saw us in Minnesota. We can still do that. We can still take our dogs to the beach on weekends, but then I can also do the hardest trails in Colorado. I'm very fortunate to have friends like Ralph Sarek and Justin up at Lucky 8, Mark Latourneau, Rovers North, all these guys. I'm their test kitchen, right? There are a lot of parts on my Defender that nobody else has because they test things on my truck. And a lot of the Trek trucks, I don't know that Justin would like me saying this, but during the pandemic, I left my Defender in New York at his shop at Lucky 8. I wasn't supposed to be there, right? Because New York was shut down, but my truck got there. But Justin had my truck, and a lot of the gear on my truck is what made it onto the first Trek trucks and the builds that Justin was doing. A lot of Ralph Sarek's gear is bumpers, the front and rear bumpers, the underbelly support, all of that gear. I'm his test kitchen. And as an architect, I love to have a say in what it looks like. So I come up with the lines on it. But my big 8274, anything that can bring a smile to Nick Dimbleby's face makes me really happy. And that 8274, I think, is as good as it gets.
I think the best part about that is the chainsaw strapped to the side of it.
There you go. I got my scabbard up there. Again, it's a purposeful build. Those who see me out building trails, bridges, and everything here in Virginia out of Pearls Pond, they understand why I have the chainsaw there. They understand I'm an old man. I do not want to reach down under my truck like a lot of these new Defenders do to get to the wind. Fortunately, Ralph is very talented. His shop, I could tell him exactly where I wanted it, exactly the height it was to be, and we could create a bumper that did it. And again, I figure if it gets the attention of people like Bob Burns, Dick Dimbleby, people like that, they know the gear that goes on these trucks. So if Tom Collins says it's okay, Bill Burke says it's okay, I think it's okay. That's how that Defender came to be. It's been built exactly the way that Robin and I wanted it, and we can use it now as the one vehicle that we use to drive all over the continental United States. It's actually been in that particular vehicle has been in all but one state. The only state it hasn't been in is Arizona. It's been in the other 47
US.
States.
So you haven't been to Alaska yet, right?
Yeah, and I guess the continental, right?
Lower
So
48.
Yeah, the lower 48. And isn't that why I think that's a big part of what makes Land Rover special is not only can these vehicles do incredible thing out in the wild and on the terrain, but you can also drive them thousands of miles at a time. And that new Defender, I drove to Oregon. I didn't have any issues.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful truck.
I was actually in the back seat when one of your friends in his classic Defender got stuck, and you were right behind him in the modern Defender.
Yep. Happy to help.
we all
look out for one another.
Yep. One of those that chided you years ago. There he was, stuck in a little bit of snow.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, but we're all friends. I'm sure I could tell you the times he's recovered me, right? So that's one of the joys I have, John, of not just the individual experience of what I've enjoyed on my own, because I have taken a lot of trips on my own with nobody else. I've taken a lot of trips with Robin, with our children. Now our grandchildren are going with us to rallies. But I think what's really special about our Land Rover community is the people we meet along the way. Very fortunate that people I met even 30 years ago are still friends. And I think that's why I'm interested in supporting our Land Rover enthusiast community is I know that we're all volunteers. Nobody's getting paid for anything here. We do it because we love our vehicles and we love seeing our friends. But everybody's got to kind of chip in.
It's actually quite the opposite. Everyone pays to be in the community.
Exactly. And we're all nonprofits doing this. And I'm very fortunate. I sit on a lot of nonprofit boards, whether they be Public Arts Commission, museums, community associations, my profession, the AIA, right? So I sit on a lot of boards, and you do those because you want to give back and support those things. But Land Rover's different. There's a passion and a joy when you're with people who share the interests that you do, whether it's your camping gear, Harold, or John is sitting in the back of the truck while Bruce Fowler and I are going through a trials course, right? We just all can laugh at one another and have a great time.
That was fun.
Nobody's grading each other. Nobody says they're better than the next. It's all getting out there and experiencing it. And I think that's what's wonderful about our Land Rover community.
So how did you get involved in the club scene? And is it just from attending MAR and then you got involved in Rove? And how did that get into reviving ANARC? And I think you were around for the first ANARC
Yes, I
iteration.
was. Well, that's to that point. The first time I ever volunteered to help with an event, right? Because I'd been going to Blue Ridge Club events and Rove events in the 90s. The first event that I actually broke down and volunteered for was Greek Peak in 1998. I actually was one of the marshals on the trials course. I wasn't in charge of anything, but I was just one of the many people you need to put on a good event. We had other competitions. I forget what some of them were. There was like maybe there was a blindfold thing and a backup competition, all these funny little things that we did at Greek Peak in 1998. So I was just a volunteer to help out. And I began to realize, as you see all the people it takes, that's when I came back to Virginia. And at the next MARA, I volunteered to help. And at some point, I worked my way through actually being in charge of the trials courses, right? In fact, one of my favorite ones is the first year we held MAR out of Pearls Pond. We hadn't filled the pond yet. So it was just a dry lake bed. That was actually where we set up the trials course, was in Pearls Pond. That was the only year we could do it because now it's been full of water since. But
that would be Pearl's Pit, I believe, at that point.
It was truly. It was pretty dusty that year. Unlike many years where it just rains and rains, that was one of those years that it was just really dusty and barren.
That's what MAR stands for, mud and rain.
And for good reason.
So if you hadn't filled the pond, it might not have all that rain.
There we go. We've created an atmospheric diversion there.
Yeah, the Adamson family, the Adamsons own Pearls Pond. The older Mr. and Mrs. Adamson have handed it off to their son, Castle, and his wife, Tucker. And they're very kind to allow us to have MAR there. They're wonderful. They're at every MAR. If you've been to a MAR, you've probably seen them there. They drive Land Rovers. So it's wonderful that their family supports our club and having events there. But yeah, that first year, I guess that's how I got roped into it. I started out building trails, building bridges, doing the RTV, that type of thing. Then at some point, I helped out by going on the board, right, and helping out and helping. Way back when, Nancy McKeag pretty much put on Mars all by herself. The telltale side that Nancy was in charge is every table had tablecloths and flowers as a centerpiece, which I always took as, wow, only at MAR do people take the time to do that. But that was one of Nancy's touches.
It goes well with the tuxedos.
That's right. Robin and I actually, in the early 2000s, we started something that I'm very proud of. At that point, up until the year 2002, Rove had only been hosting one event a year. And boy, what an event it was. You guys have heard about these, and you guys may have been to some of them. We would have 400 to 500 trucks at every MAR. It really tested the capacity of our membership. That's why we all needed to volunteer and help out. In 2002, I took it to the board and said, hey, Robin and I, how about if we host a spring event? And maybe it's smaller in a different part of the state. So we actually, I think it was 4 years, we started a spring event out at Douthit State Park in the western part of the state. And they had cabins there and camping and different type of terrain out there. Loved going to Potts Mountain and Clifton Forge and Covington. just a beautiful part of Virginia out there. But that got our club doing 2 events a year, which grew into wintergreen, right? You've been to Rovers at wintergreen. Now we have a stable home there. I'm very proud. When I became president in 2012, our club, president of Rope, our club didn't have a home for really for any events. It was somewhat of a low point for our club for a couple years. We didn't have a home. It was unfortunate that one of our past presidents of all things, of Rove, was out using Pearl's Pond when they didn't have permission. And they just happened to run into Mr. Adamson. And so our club was asked not to come back. The very unfortunate thing was our member, whose name we do not say, is no longer in the club because of what he did. But it was inexcusable. But that caused our entire club to lose Pearl's Pond for all those years. In 2012, Mike McKaig and Ben Saunders came to me and asked me to come back on the board and try to bring that routine. I'm a big believer in routines. And John, you've heard this when we talk at our board meetings for ANARC. Routine is good. If people know how to plan out their year and what types of opportunities are going to be available at rallies or events, they can make plans, right? Because if we're going to invite our families, our kids, our spouses, girlfriends, people to come with us, we need to know what that routine is. Is it going to work? In 2012, when I came back on the board, we didn't have any events. So the first thing I did was, and this is where my delegation skills come in, John, is I got 4 people to come on the board with me. I got people like Mike Boggs, Mark Garrett, David Short, people who are really sharp and really committed to come in and help. And we dove into it hard. Fortunately, Mike Boggs had a relationship with Wintergreen. He does a lot of the work there. And at the time, I was actually doing work for Jim Justice, who owned Wintergreen, right? Just like he owns the Greenbrier. At that point, he sold it since, so he still has some land holdings out there, some of the land still in Jim's name. So we corralled them and pulled together, and that's how we got permission from Wintergreen to have our spring event there. And we started that in 2013. In 2012 is when we started clearing the trails and making it work. We had to build that area. And again, that's all on Mike Boggs. If you haven't met Mike, I would love to introduce you to him. He and his wife, Cindy, are wonderful. Just like Robin and our kids grew up at events, Cindy and Mike, all of their kids are wonderful. I have very special memories of going to rallies with Mike and Cindy's children. And now they have children who ride around with me in my truck. But anyways, that's how we got into Wintergreen as a spring event. And at the same time, I was working with Sam Moore on Wheatland Farm. Sam passed away a few years ago, but Sam's always been a member of Rove. He had a D1 and an old series truck, and just one of the kindest people you could ever meet. And Sam was kind enough to invite us down. Interestingly, the reason we knew Wheatland had trails is we had cut one trail for Sam to have a spring event there. I want to say it was like 08, 09, something like that. We knew there was one trail there. When we talked to Sam, it worked out. And that's why for the next 10 years, 9 years, I think it was, we used Wheatland Farm before coming back to Pearl's Pond. One of the things I feel strongly about is when you have these friendships that we have in these clubs, you need to provide opportunities for them to get together. Having one event a year, it's wonderful when you see each other, but you really need 2. And then there's people like myself who we travel, right? I'll be in Colorado this weekend for the Overland Expo. I'm meeting some Land Rover friends out there, the Rocky Mountain event up in Loveland. As you develop these friendships, you don't want to just see each other once a year or twice a year. You want to travel. Bruce Fowler's a dear friend. I love going to Maine every winter. He's such a great guy. And the nicest people are up there because who's crazy enough to go to Maine in February?
Yes.
What a wonderful gathering.
How did you end up reviving ANARC? Because you were basically instrumental in bringing that back.
Our last year at Pearl's Pond in 2021, I think Jeff Aronson and I are very good friends. I've known Jeff a long time. He never ages. He looks the exact same as he did in 1998.
That is
I
true.
think he was born like that.
He's ageless. Jeff is really remarkable. He does.
I believe the word is timeless.
Yes.
That's how he does it. But Jeff and I were talking at Wheatland. That was our last year there. And we were talking about the future. It's like, where are we going to go with things? And I posed to Jeff, because Jeff was actually a speaker at the 50th at Greek Peak. I said, Jeff, part of being organized is you got to look a few years out. What's going to happen in 2023? It's going to be 75. Who's going to pick that up? And unfortunately, those who know the history, Dixon probably knows it well because he was very involved in the 50th. He and Chris Brown and Sandy Grice were basically the three that put on the 50th. Dixon could share with us some of the trials and tribulations of what they went through, but the group disbanded because, of all things, they were approached by the New York DEQ. Some participants had gone off and used some of the trails off property and disturbed some sensitive environmental areas. And the fine was approximately $20,000, which just happened to be all the money that ANARC had made off of the event. And I think it so deflated Dixon and Chris and Sandy that they said, wow, we just worked for 3 years to put this event on, and a couple people went out and did the wrong thing, went in the wrong place, and now the club has no money to do anything. I think that might be, we could ask Dixon, I think that might be the reason why ANARC went away in 99. But Jeff and I always have talked about ANARC. Can we get it going again? And that's when we came to the realization that, hey, in 2 years, there's going to be the 75th. That's when we started talking about it. The first people we reached out to was Dixon. I love Dixon. He's seen it all, right? He's been around. He knows how this works. And because the Ottawa Valley Club and Rove were the two founders of ANARC back for the 50th, we decided to get the band back together, and Dixon brought some of the members from OVLR, and I worked with Rove to come up with a team. And that's how the board of directors was created in 2022. And John, I believe that's when I spoke with you, was in early 2022 to say, hey, let's get together. The next year and a half is going to be pretty hairy if we're going to pull off the 75th. And it was, but well worth it.
It was well worth it. It was a great event. We only missed one thing. We didn't have a group photo. That's the only thing we did wrong.
Yep.
But honestly, I think only a few of us feel like that was a missed event, because nobody else was like, man, I missed something. There was always,
you always
just having so much fun with everything.
You could always, I'm sure you have the list of all the people who went. You could probably reach out to them, get them to send in a picture of their truck, and then somebody probably knows how to use Photoshop.
Oh, there we go. Put them all together.
Right.
Yeah, there's an idea.
Yeah, but I will say, helping to organize that, Bruce Fowler and I were the two at the top, but as all of you saw, we had over 50 volunteers helping, whether it was a rally control, registration, the terrain team, the ANARC Cup competition team, right? We had so many different people helping out, the dinners, the social events. You can't pull off an event with over 1,000 people with just a handful of volunteers, right? You've got to go really deep. And I will say I was fortunate because I had gotten to know over the years, as had Bruce, so many people out there in the Land Rover community. We leaned heavily on people from all over the country. This wasn't just a Virginia group or an OVLR group. There were people from all over North America who were helping. And that comes through friendships, right? And these were people we knew, right? We knew we could count on them, and we knew what their talents were. So whether they lived in Florida or Iowa, New Mexico, we knew we could count on them to come through. And hats off to them. To pull that off, to have over 500 trucks and 1,000 people there, that was special.
It was a special event. It was well done. What's the future for ANARC? I know we're planning to do an 80th.
I guess what we heard most, John, was that people really like Greek Peak, right? They would like to go back there. Greek Peak would love to have us go there every year.
Of course.
I still stay in touch with Jen and Chelsea and Aiden, all the people on their team. They would love to have us go every year. And we might just do a small event there that's not really ANARC, but another club doing an event there every year. ANARC's plan is to go there every 5 years. So it'd be the 80th, the 85th, the 90th, and just keep going every 5 years. The 4 years in between, ANARC would work with local clubs like we're doing this year in 2024, hosting 3 events, partnering with clubs in Oregon, Minnesota, and the Gulf Coast down in Alabama. Next year, we envision 2 events. We haven't finalized those, which ones they'll be, but they'll be announced soon. So the goal is to have ANARC go around the country and support local clubs, much like we did just a couple of weeks ago in Minnesota. And that helps clubs develop the confidence to do their own events and to perhaps try new things. And I get back to the word routine, develop routines that can help their club have that comfort. And I think that's what was really rewarding in Minnesota is that event was 4 times the size of what they normally have. And one of the reasons it was so much larger is people brought out their kids and their spouses, their families were there, their dogs, right? Because they knew it wasn't just about a bunch of guys going off and driving in the woods. There was going to be a lot of really nice stuff going on during the event.
To be fair, Bob, that event has always been about the families and the wives and the kids. It's been a family event for many years.
Right. The picnic. I believe this was their 41st picnic.
Yes.
Part of what we heard in the recap just a couple nights ago, we had a recap with them to hear what the pros and the cons, what worked, what didn't work. But one of the things we heard consistently, Harold, was that it gave them confidence to grow the number, like that Saturday night dinner, to have something that nice. So I don't mean to suggest that they didn't bring their wives and kids in the past. It just gave them something to do. That talk that Jenna and Liza gave on Saturday was the room was packed. You couldn't
it was standing room only.
Exactly. And I'll give a shout out to Jenna and Liza. They're the Rebel Rally team. They have JLR sponsorship this year. One of the things we're really proud of is that is the first time that any of us can recall. And if any of your listeners know of another event, I would love to hear from them. We believe that's the first time that women have been the off-road gurus at a Land Rover event, which is saying something, right? Because I love Daphne Green. I put her on a pedestal. She is a rock star, right? But I don't think Daphne's ever been provided the opportunity to be the lead. And so this is important to us. ANARC, one of the things we've been talking about with JLR all year is how to feature or memorialize the importance of women in Land Rover. So that's why in Oregon, we made a special effort to do the Barber Toy. And Laura and Sarah did an incredible job with that. And all the women in Oregon, they really had fun, really dealing with the history of women in Land Rover. And to have all of what they did in Oregon, that's special. And then to have Jenna and Liza truly be the first in Minnesota. Those are the types of things our clubs and ANARC should recognize.
Yeah,
right?
and I have to say, they really stepped up when it came time to do the challenge thing for the cup. They messed with everyone's head.
Being one of those participants, I know exactly what you're talking about, Harold. They definitely played with our minds. But that's part of supporting our community, right? It's not just a bunch of guys getting together. We are diverse, just as our vehicles are diverse. And I think as we provide opportunities for enthusiasts to get out and enjoy their vehicles, we have to acknowledge it's not just all the Series 1 crowd or the classic crowd or the new Defender or the old Defender crowd, right? We all drink from the same canteen and we're all out having fun together. And our events need to factor that in. So thank you to Jenna and Liza for making the long trip to Minnesota. They really put on a good show, only to be rivaled by Astro Bob, of course.
And we all found out that Astro Bob, contrary to popular belief, was a real person. It wasn't just Bob Steele in a hippie wig and tie-dye. Which is what we were worried it was going to be.
Yeah, everybody kept talking to me. They were like, how are you going to pull this off? And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? This is a real guy. Astro Bob was incredible. And Harold, you saw people actually outside the rally who heard that Astro Bob was going to be there.
He's a celebrity up in those parts. People know him up there.
Yeah, he's a rock star, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
Astro Bob.
He's got his 15-inch telescope, which is the biggest telescope you can stuff into the back of a compact station wagon. And he had that 1.21 gigawatt laser pointer. He was knocking stars out of the sky with it.
I think I saw airplanes coming down off of that laser.
Yeah, I think it would slice a wing off.
So Astro Bob was a true treat. And again, that's part of what we encourage clubs to do, right? Is to step outside the norm, have other opportunities for people to, whether it's get to know things about what Jenna and Liza were talking about. I chuckled. It was the old school mapping. Back when I started driving off-road, we didn't have GPS, right? We had paper maps and compasses, and you had, whether you call it orienteering or whatever, you had to be able to find your way through the wilderness with those skills. And Jenna and Liza possessed those. People who had compasses could actually sit there and work with them on how to do it. What a wonderful talk that they had. And here I'm thinking, you know, who in Minnesota is going to want to go listen to Jenna and Liza talk about the Rebelle? And
you'd be surprised.
Yeah, it was packed. And I think everybody had a great time and really learned something. So again, thank you to Jenna and Liza.
And wasn't it nice that we had that facility, that nice air-conditioned room that they could work out of?
That was nice. I got to be careful. I'm giving them way too many compliments. After what they did to me in that physical challenge, the mental challenge is what it more became. They definitely had the last laugh at everybody going off in the wrong direction, and it was diabolical.
Back to the future of ANARC, we've had a number of luminaries, as you like to call them, Bob, at the Jubilee. And is there anyone you're thinking about for future ANARC events? Or are there maybe any past luminaries that spark your interest?
Yeah, there's a good number. We were fortunate at Greek Peak for the 75th to have 5 notable luminaries, right? We had Kim McCullough, Daphne Green, Nick Rogers, Bob Burns, and Nick Dimbleby. And one of the reasons, there were many reasons why I was very happy to have all 5 there. Number one, some of them were not aware of the Land Rover club culture in North America, right? To get them involved, Kim McCullough I'd seen many times. Daphne, her Camel Trophy partner, Jim Sweat, was there. What did we have? 8 Camel Trophy drivers there, I think. But Daphne was very special. But the one that I really enjoy is Nick Dimbleby. I'm sure many of you have his books too, and his photography is just over the top. I have a 1978 two-door Classic that was originally built for the West German market. That the reason I now own it is the person who I admire most in our Land Rover community, Mike McCaig, purchased the truck. He and his wife, Nancy, purchased it. I believe it was 1996, because when I first started going to Rove events more, he would be driving it there. It was at the 50th, right, at Greek Peak. And because they're such good friends, I always told Mike that if he ever sold Bernie this two-door Classic, that I wanted to buy it. I wanted to be the one who got Bernie, because it was such a special truck to Nancy and Mike and Sarah and Adam that there was something about it. I actually purchased it 8 years ago from Mike. I found a donor two-door also because it needed a lot of work. And I took 7 years to rebuild it. Thank you to Ralph Sarek for all the work he did on it. I had lots of friends who helped out. It's a total chassis up rebuild, but it's still got all the matching numbers, the motor, transmission, carburetors, everything's been totally rebuilt. So it's perfect in every way. And the first event it was to go to was the 75th, was to Greek Peak. And Nick Dimbleby, for those who aren't aware, really knows two-door classics. He has one, and between he and Mike Bishop, and I think some of you know who Mike is, they know these old trucks. Not only was Nick going to be there, but Mark Latourne, who's a dear friend. And I love all that Mark has done for our community at Rovers North. And knowing that Mark and Nick were going to be there, I was like, okay, I definitely have to have Bernie there because I just finished the build and I needed to find out, are some of the parts and the kit, is it perfect? Because this was a West German truck. You won't be surprised to learn that some of the fittings were not correct. I came to find out exactly what was wrong, like the little bonnet plastic rubber pieces that are for pedestrian impact that protect the metal hinges on the top of the bonnet, right? Apparently in West Germany, they had these plastic fittings. This is just an example of the tiny little minutia that people like Nick and Mark understand. While I was there, not only did I have the joy of driving Bernie for the first time and Bernie being back there because Bernie was at the 50th, but getting to have people like Nick and Mark put their eyes on it and make sure that all the parts were right. And then, of course, who helps me get all the parts? Mark Latourne. He finds these parts. Mike Bishop helped me find some parts in Australia. Mark found some parts in Poland. So it's nice to have friends like that who go out of their way to help you. And that's why Bernie is so special. I did all of this work. It was a labor of love. And my only thing is I just want to keep it so I can give my grandchildren rides around in it at Mar and other events. It's not a show car. I've already driven it and damaged it. But it's just the joy of having a truck that I know how special it was to Mike and Nancy. But I also know that people who I believe know Land Rover, know how important the two-door classic is to our heritage. Again, I go back to this. Remember, 1991, one of the architects on my staff, Dan, pointed out to me the beauty of the Range Rover Classic. That was a four-door, right? That's what we got in North America. Those two-door classics, they are beautiful. And it has been in the loop, right? Yes. It's got chops. A two-door classic, I think, is the most beautiful vehicle ever created.
They ought to still make two-door Range Rovers in some flavor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I have friends who collect Ferraris, but that two-door classic, it just, I just think it's really special.
Yeah, the Ferrari will go faster, but the Range Rover will go anywhere.
I'm very fortunate to have Bernie. I will say, while we were at Greek Peak, Bruce Fowler had the phone number for Bernice. I think she lives in New Hampshire. That's who owned the truck before the McKegs bought it. That's why they call it Bernie. We called Bernice. It was her birthday on the Saturday at Greek Peak. We called Bernice to wish her a happy birthday. We sent her photographs of all of us next to Bernie. That's part of the other thing about Land Rovers, right? Is they're worth having a story. There are so many stories out there about these trucks, and Bernie's a special one to our family.
Bob, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been great to hear your story about how you're involved in the community. And if I may, on behalf of the Land Rover community, thank you for all you've done, because really you've been a force in getting the Jubilee to happen. I don't think it would happen without you.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to be here. I hope there's something in there that somebody realizes that we perhaps met along the way, or there might be an opportunity to meet in the future. John, we have the event coming up October 24th to 27th down in Robertsdale, Alabama, the GARR. Definitely be wearing your pirate hat for that one. And we have two events that, John, I think your podcast, CentreSteer, you're great friends of our enthusiast community and certainly of ANARC. We should have those two dates ready to go live here within the next couple of months. Everybody should stay tuned to CentreSteer to get word on the two events coming up next year. And knowing what the possibilities are, they're going to be pretty nice. That'll be an opportunity for all of us to gather and celebrate our friendships and hopefully keep it all going, right? We got so much to do in the future.
Important things.
Exactly.
Thanks again, Bob. Do appreciate it.
Great being with you. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed show number 137. Thanks very much to Bob Steele for coming on the program this month. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and be among the first to learn about ANARC's 2025 events. They will be announced soon. And as Bob indicated, this podcast will be the official announcement, first official announcement location. And thanks to Harold. Appreciate it, Harold, coming on and giving us the North Star Rover Rally review. That was very cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that event. I went last year, so I had to come this year, and I'm glad I did. So I'll be there next year in some form or another. So
that's your home state, right?
That is my home state. It is my home state. So they're my people. I can understand their accent, which is always a good thing.
And thanks to Dixon and Morgan for helping out, even though they can't always join us every time for everything. Certainly appreciate them coming on. Dixon had his excused absence this month because he was participating in the OVLR birthday party. So next month, Dixon, we want to hear from you about the OVL birthday party.
Yeah, it's your turn to give us a follow-up.
And thanks to the One True Pax for his continued production support. Pax, we encourage you to start driving a Land Rover again. We post a new podcast at the end of every month. Our website, CentreSteer.com, has all our shows to listen to and show notes, which have links to the stories we discussed in today's podcast. You can directly support the podcast at patreon.com/CentreSteer. That's center in the British spelling. You can be just like Thomas and become a Patreon supporter. Thanks, Thomas. You can also buy a t-shirt, sticker, or even a tee. Visit our website for details. You can be just like Bob. Buy us a brown water /tea. If you have an idea for a guest, please send us the details and contact information if you have it. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear from you and what you're up to in your Land Rover.
On behalf of the entire North American-based crew here at the CentreSteer podcast, I'd like to thank you for listening today. We know you have a choice when it comes to your podcasting content, and we do appreciate your choosing us. Please take a moment to look around you for any personal items you may be leaving behind, especially in the overhead bins. Remember that some items may have shifted during the show. Please watch your step as you make your way past the gigantic laser pointer, and you may now resume your important things.
The tragic thing is I bought a Toyota Land Cruiser